Hey Claude, make me an add-on. No mistakes. Right, okay. Memes aside, LLMs have absolutely aided coders. They can be brilliant tools, but here's the question. Is leaning on them every single day quietly eroding your actual coding skills? The muscle you don't use? It's going to fade away. So today, no shortcuts. Watch this. A complete scene with Suzanne, a camera that automatically points at our star, and a 3-point lighting setup that moves with it. All built from scratch. Hello everybody, I'm Mike, and today we're building a practical Blender add-on from scratch. A one-click camera and lighting rig. We'll start with the absolute basics. What import BPY even means, and work our way up to a professional rig you can trigger with a custom UI and even something you can expand on yourself. This is a complete beginner guide. I'll explain everything as we go along. Let's hop on over into Blender. So where do we script in Blender? Well, if we have a look at the top of our screen, we've got a series of workspaces that we can flick between. We've got layout, modeling, sculpting, etc. Now, if we use the middle mouse scroll wheel and scroll down, or you can hold that down and move left and right, you will see scripting at the very end. Let's go ahead and select that, and we've got our main text editor window in front of us here. We're going to go ahead and you can either use the text new option, Alt and N, or you can click new at the very top here. Now, before we do anything else, I'm going to go to where it says text and type in my script. You could call it my first script as well if you wanted to. If we go ahead and press enter, you'll notice down here in this info window, we have bpy.data.text text name equals text. We'll get back to that later because this area down here is going to be very important when you start making your first Blender scripts. Now, this area here in the middle, this large area, is the text editor, and this is where our Python scripts will live inside Blender. It's basically a very simple code editor, and by default, if we go up to view, we can see we've got line numbers, and you can see the number 1 there, and we've also got syntax highlight turned on. So when we type in things, it will just color them in appropriately, and you'll see that as we go along as well. As a side note, you can also make notes in a text editor as well, which I find incredibly useful if I need to come back to a model that I'm doing, and perhaps I've got a list of to-dos that I need to work through. You can actually have it built in to your Blender file itself. Okay, so first of all, we're going to type in import, and you can see there that's colored in red, BPY. Now, what does import BPY do? Well, it's going to be there at the top of every single script that you make. Python on its own doesn't know anything about Blender. It's a general purpose programming language. The word import tells Python to load a toolbox of extra functionality. Now, BPY stands for Blender Python. It's the bridge between Python and Blender itself. Every Blender command that we use will start with BPY, and that's how Python accesses Blender's tools. Without this line, none of the Blender commands would work at all. Before writing the next line, we would need to answer, how would you ever know what to type? Well, remember when I mentioned this little area down at the bottom left earlier? This is the info editor, and it logs every action you perform in Blender, or at least nearly every action. Now watch it while you do some things manually. If we go ahead and grab our cube and just press G and move it around a little, you can see here a load of stuff appears. I'm going to press Control and space on this just to make it full screen for a moment. And we can see here it's got bpy.ops, transform, translate. So translate is moving in Blender. Transform is a type of operation, moving, scaling, and rotating. And then an operation. So this is a Blender Python operation, which then will transform an object, in this case translate. And then you have a parentheses or a bracket if you're in the UK. And this parentheses will open up, and then there are a load of parameters. What are you doing? Where are you moving it? What type of orientation you're doing? Where's the pivot point? Lots and lots of information. Most of them we're not going to need, and in fact, many of them are what we call optional. Now, later on, you're likely to move away from this, but for now, and basic operations is absolutely perfect for what we want to do. Now, over in the 3D viewport, let's go ahead, making sure our cursor's there. We're going to press the A key, and we'll see what we get down here. We get BPY, so it's another Blender Python operation. It's to do with objects, and we're going to select all, action select. Perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that and copy and paste it into our script. Let's go ahead, right click, copy. come up here and you can use whatever paste command you're used to. I'm going to press Control and V, and there we go. We've got bpy.ops, object, select all, action, select. Now you can see we've got these parentheses here again. So these are the parameters. Now I'm not sure what the other option is, what deselect happens to be. But I know if we hover over in the 3D viewport itself, if we press Alt and A, we can see here we've now got action deselect. So we have different ways of performing an operation. So select all is the instruction, and then what to do with that, whether we're selecting or deselecting. So using the info panel down here, Blender is giving us the code we need. That's brilliant. Now let's have a closer look at how this line is structured, this bpy.ops.object, etc. And to do that, we're going to go into this area on the left called the Python console. Again, I'm going to press Control and Space so that it just fills up the screen so we can focus on it. And I'm going to use the Control button and my mouse scroll wheel just to make this a bit bigger and easier to read. So let's go through it step by step. So first of all, we have our BPY, then we go .ops. Now, ops is short for operators. These are actions, things that do something. And then we need a category. If I go dot again, and I'm just going to show you something here. If we press the tab key, you can see there are a load of different categories that the operations can do. Now, in this particular case, we're working on objects in the scene. So if I start typing in OBJ and press tab again, it will actually auto complete for us. Now, object is one, and then if I press tab again, it will actually put the next dot in as well. So when we're using the Blender Python console, if you're playing around and exploring, you can help yourself by using the tab key, and it might auto complete what you're trying to type. Then, if I press tab again, you'll see that there are many more options that this operator can do. And in this case, we want to do select. So again, I'm going to start typing in select and pressing tab. And you can see there are lots of different selects we can do. We can select all by type, the cameras, etc. We want all. And I'm going to press tab there. And then we can see finally it's giving us another hint. We've got action equals toggle. Or in our case, we would want to have action equals. Now, when we're typing Python, there is something called the Python style guide. Even though it's not being used here, for example, I find it a lot easier whenever you've got something like a symbol like equals to have a space around it so you can see what's going on. Now, you could use quotation marks like I've just used here, or you can use apostrophes. Whatever one you do pick is the one you should probably stick with throughout the code that you write. Finally, what do we need to put in here? We've seen it before. We type in select. Now I'm going to press Control and Tab just to make this area smaller. If I press Enter, we're running the code manually. If I press Enter, I've not closed my parentheses. This is important. Now, when we're over here in the text editor, that will actually happen because we'll turn it on in a moment, but I've not closed my parentheses. So we get that ... It's saying, hey, is there more? We do that. It says it's finished. So it's finished that operation. And you can see everything in our 3D viewport has been selected. So we've run that manually. If we deselect everything and then run our script by pressing the play button, again, everything gets selected. How fantastic is that? We've basically written our first script. All it does is select all. It's not particularly useful, but well done. We've got our first script working. Thank you for watching so far. I hope you're enjoying the content. One of the things you'll notice as we're going through this video is whilst it is long, it's very compact and very focused. We're not going to do a deep dive on absolutely everything. However, if you do want that deep dive, I do have a dedicated Python course geared towards beginners, and I will make sure that it's linked at the top of the description if you want to level up your Python with Blender. Now, I do like mini challenges. It helps you solidify the knowledge that you've already learnt. What I'd like you to do is delete everything in the scene, learn from the info panel what the code is that you need, and then implement it over here in your code. You can just undo that command afterwards in order to bring everything back into the scene. Pause the video for a second and give that a go. Hey, did you pause the video? Did you give it a go? Well, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to highlight everything. And then whilst my cursor is over here, I'm going to hit the delete key. And we can see it's deleted 3 objects. bpy.ops, object, delete. And then it's got this extra bit afterwards. I bet that's not needed. I bet those are optional. So I'm going to copy that and paste it over into my script. Now, let's go back over to the 3D viewport and undo. We've got that back. I can still paste that back in. Should have done that the other way around, but there we go, because I undid what was over in the text editor. Now we've got our objects back. If I run my script, so let's make sure nothing is selected and just run the script. We've now got a script that will select everything and clear the scene down. This can be really useful. Now, I did say, I wonder if these are optional. So let's just undo that again. Let's highlight these optional things. We don't want to remove the parentheses. We still want those to be there. I'm going to press play. And there we go. It will delete everything. So some of the parameters that you will see are optional. They're not necessary. And in this case, I just want to delete everything. So that's absolutely fine. The default settings that we saw, these ones right here, will be used automatically. Now, a quick productivity tip, if we go up to the edit menu and then preferences, when we have the preferences just here, if we go to the interface, we can go down to developer extras. That can be useful. And also Python tooltips. Now, whilst we will be using the info panel on the lower right a lot of the time, what can happen is if you hover over certain areas without the Python tooltips enabled, we just get what it is, render engine cycles. Okay, Python tooltips, suddenly we see a lot more information. bpy.data.scenes, scene.render engine. With that, I bet we can change the render engine using Python. We're not going to do that at the moment. However, that's one of the really useful things that I find having enabled whenever you're working in Blender. Now, the final thing I want to do whilst here is go to the editing tab. If we go down to text editor, auto close character pairs. Let's put a tick in that box, make sure we save our preferences. The reason we've done that is now whenever we are typing over here, if we use a parentheses, you can see that it automatically puts the next pair in. Square brackets, it does the same. And of course, curly braces, it does the same there. And you'll never guess what, when it comes to our apostrophe, it will do that, or even our quotation marks. Really useful to have that turned on, because it means that it's very hard to forget to close, as you saw I did earlier over in the Python console. Now, this won't apply over in the Python console. You'll still have to type that manually, but over here in the text editor, that will be done for you. Let's highlight everything there. And I think we've got just enough space to zoom in. I'm going to use the control key and the middle mouse button just to make that a little larger, just like we did over here. In fact, I'm going to make this area just a little smaller whilst I'm at it. Right, let's move on to the next part of our script. I'm going to run it again so it's all clear. I'm going to press Shift and A. That's going to bring up the Add menu. And then I'm going to go to Mesh and Monkey. And we can see down here, bpy.ops, primitive, monkey, etc. So let's go ahead and copy that. Now, because we're doing a separate part here, we're now adding something in. I'm going to give myself a little space and then add that in. And we've got all of this extra stuff here, and you can see one of the parameters is size. So I should imagine different shapes, different mesh objects will have different parameters for the number of vertices that they're using, etc. I should imagine if we use a cylinder, it will have the number of vertices and the height or depth, whatever it's going to be called. But these are probably all default values. So let's go ahead, delete everything that's in there, leaving the parentheses on the end. Let's delete Suzanne from our scene and then run our script. It's cleared everything. So if there was anything there, and it's added Suzanne into our scene. Perfect. And there we go. We've completed a basic script. Now, obviously, this is now locked within a blend file. If you wanted to use it in other places, we would either have to save it as part of the default blend file, or what we can do here is go text, save or save as. I always go to save as, and then we can pick a specific location. Once you've found where you want to save your file, I'm going to go ahead and click the little plus at the top here on the left-hand side, intro and phase 1 of this video, and then what I can do is just type in my script. So I'm going to call this clear scene and add Suzanne. Now, I'm a big believer in naming things exactly what they are, so that's what I'm going to do here, and I'm going to go ahead and click save. Now you can load this up in any other project and use it as you want to. And this is really the beginnings of an add-on. You can imagine if this had far more functionality than just clearing the scene and adding a monkey, that it would be incredibly useful. And of course, you could just copy and paste this into any blend file in order to achieve that. And that's how I started making add-ons. I had a series of scripts like this that I would go ahead and just copy between blend files. And eventually, I thought there must be a better way. And of course, that is making an add-on. And so I'm going to take you through the journey that I did. And well done, you've created your first Python script. Now it's time to make it a bit more robust. Simple, just here. Let's go ahead and click that. And we can see, if we scroll down, there's quite a lot there. I'm going to press Control and Space So we're just focused on the code and nothing else. And now that we've done that, we can scroll down, and I'm going to zoom out ever so slightly so that everything is there. Perfect. Now what this is doing is it's creating a new text block with Blender's official starting point for an operator. It looks intimidating at first, and we're going to break this down. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through this and remove parts that we don't need at this moment in time. We don't need def main context at the top. So I'm going to highlight from line 8 up to line 4 and delete those. That's actually not caught line 8, so we're going to have to delete another one. The next one we're going to remove is the at class method. Again, I'm going to highlight everything there from lines 11 to 8 and delete that. And I want to make sure that there's 2 spaces between each one of these things that says def as I'm going through and clearing these out. I'm also going to remove this one here, the definition menu func, and we're going to highlight all of that and take it down until line 17 like so, and press delete. And then we're going to tidy up the register by removing line 17 and the empty line 18. And we're going to do the same down here. So 22 and 21 need to go. And then finally, we're going to remove the back end here. So we should end up with 24 lines. Let's just run through it. We've got the import BPY, then we've got a couple of spaces, then we've got a class, then we've got the def execute. This is where we're going to put our main code. We're going to register the object, and then it has a register and an unregister, and then finally if name equals main, register. So that's still quite a lot to run through, but we'll go through it now one piece at a time. Okay, so we know what import BPY means. What is a class? A class is basically a blueprint. It describes something and what it can do. In this case, we're creating a blueprint for our own custom operator. Now, simple operator is the name that we're giving our blueprint, and we'll change this to something meaningful later on. The bit in the parentheses, the bpy.types.operator, this tells Blender our blueprint is based upon an existing operator blueprint. We're not building from scratch, we're extending something Blender already understands. Think of it like, I'm creating a new type of operator, and here's what makes mine special. So let's go through the rest of this. First of all, the tooltip. Now the tooltip is something that will appear when you hover over something. So if I hover over this area here, a tooltip appears saying unlink active text data block. So we can put something more descriptive in here. Let's type in exactly what our add-on does. In this case, it's going to clear the scene and adds Suzanne. Okay, so line 6, the BL_ID name. This is basically the internal name Blender uses to identify your operator. It's how you call it from code or assign it to a hotkey. There are some naming rules from this. It must be lowercase. It must contain exactly one dot. In this case, we've got a dot just there after the object. The part before the dot is the category, and the part after the dot is the operator name. And we use underscores for spaces. So I'm happy with the category being object, but let's rename this one here something like scene underscore setup. So what is happening here is the BL ID name is being assigned. That's what a single equals symbol means. It's being assigned this value here. Now the BL label. The BL label is a human readable name. It appears in menus. It's what appears when you hit the F3 key and do a search. Let's change it to scene setup. So SCENE and then setup. And in this case, we don't have an underscore between the two. This is how we're going to read it when something appears in our tooltip. So as we hover over one of these again, we can see it says open text. And that is the example, what we're using here with our BL label. So next is line 9. Let's just highlight it here. Def execute. Now, what is def? It defines a function. It's a reusable block of code that does something. Now, execute is the function Blender automatically runs when we trigger this operator. The name execute is special. Blender looks for it specifically. And if we have a look inside the parentheses here, we've got 2 parameters. We've got self and context. The word self refers to this specific operator. This is required by Python when writing functions inside of a class. For now, just know it needs to be there. And the context? Well, Blender passes this in automatically. It contains information about the current state, what's selected, what mode you're in. We won't use this directly in this example, but it does need to be there. Now, next is the return statement. We don't actually need line 10 in our example, so we're going to remove that as well. We've got this return statement. So what happens after this function has finished doing what it's doing? So what is a return? Well, whatever has called this function, so when we go ahead and run it, it sends information back to whatever had called it. And when the function is done, this is the final answer. Now, finished tells Blender the operator completed successfully. Other options include things like cancelled if something went wrong. The curly braces make it a set, a Python data type. Now, don't worry about why at the moment, just know that this is a format that Blender is expecting. Now, our script itself goes inside the execute function before the return statement. So let's just press return, add ourselves in a line there, and using this drop down at the very top, we can drop that down, go to our script that we'd already written, and copy this information. We're going to copy it, Control and C, go back to our operator, and Control and V, and paste that in. Now, you'll notice it's come in a little bit funky. So what we need to do here is we need to change the indentation. Indentation in Python is incredibly important. You'll notice after the class, everything else written inside that class is indented by 4 spaces, or in this case, a tab. And just so you know, if you go to Edit, Preferences, and go down to the Save and Load tab, you'll see that text files, tabs as spaces. So when we use the tab key, which I'm going to do whenever we need to adjust things, we're going to press it 1, 2, and that's going to move it across 8 characters, 8 spaces in total. Now, I need to do everything else here so that it's at the same level, so I can highlight everything else and also press the tab key. Now, this looks a bit silly as it currently is, so I'm just going to squish that down like so, and then have the return separate, so it's just easier for me to read. And finally, notice we've got import BPY right here, and we've also got it at the very top. We don't need to do it twice. I'm going to remove the one from inside the execute function. Now, you can leave it like this. I like things being nice and easy to read like this. If you've squished all your code up like so, that's also absolutely fine. The style that you use might be personal, might be the group you're working in. And when it comes to code like this, I do like making things as easy as possible to read, especially when I'm working on it. And it's often the case that later on I might come back and reformat things when I'm not working on it. So when I'm actively working on a script, I might have it like that, so I understand that this chunk in the middle with the spaces either side is what I'm working on. But then later on, I might come back and just tidy up the code, so to speak, to make it more compact. But still, readability is more important than anything else when it comes to your code. So next, let's move down to the register function. In fact, line 16 doesn't need to be there either. So let's just clear that up. So line 16, def register. So the register function tells Blender that this operator exists. Until you register it, Blender does not know about it at all. Now, do note, the function is outside of the class. Notice here that my indentation is at the same level as the class. This is a standalone function and it's not part of our operator. And you'll notice that the name of the operator, simple operator at the top, has to match the class name itself. And then underneath the register, we have another function, unregister. This does the opposite. It tells Blender to forget about the operator, and this is used when we toggle add-ons on and off to make sure that they're cleaned up properly. And then we have our final block here, line 24 and 25. Now, this if name equals main is something you're going to notice lots whenever you're working in Python. This is a Python idiom that means if this script is being run directly, do the following. So when you press play in the text editor at the very top here, Python sets a special variable name called main, and this line checks for that and runs the register function if it's true. So why does this matter? When a script becomes an add-on, Blender calls register itself. This check prevents register from being run twice. For now, just know this makes the play button at the very top of our script work, which means we can test it as we're developing it. So let's just run through our script and make sure that everything is here that we would expect. We're importing the BPY, that's fine. We've got simple operator. Well, we didn't do any renaming, did we? We renamed scene setup just here. So I think we should call this scene setup as well. And where else is this used? Well, let's highlight this and copy it, because it's used down here. So I'm just going to overwrite the simple operator within the parentheses where we're registering, and then finally when we're unregistering as well. I believe that is everywhere it's required. We've got our tooltip here, everything else. The ID name and label is set up. We've got our code. We're going to select all. We're going to delete everything, and we're going to add a standard primitive monkey, Suzanne the monkey. And then we're going to return finished to tell Blender that it's working. Then we've got the register and unregister. And then finally, we've got our code down here that means that when we go ahead and press play, it's effectively added in our add-on. And then all we need to do is press F3. And if we search for scene setup, there it is, object.scene setup. It will do our operation for us. Brilliant. So it does the same thing as before, but now it is a proper operator that Blender recognizes. Now, I know this might feel like a lot of code compared to where we started, but you've just learnt the fundamental structure that every single Blender add-on actually uses. Everything else builds on this foundation. Brilliant work. Right, if you're enjoying this and finding it helpful, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel and lets me know what content to create more of. So we're actually almost there. An add-on needs two things. The Python file saved outside of Blender, which we've already done, and then we need some metadata that describes it. Name, author, version of Blender that it works with, the version of the add-on, etc. Now, there are two ways to provide that metadata. The traditional way uses a Python dictionary called bl_info. The modern way, introduced in Blender 4.2, uses a separate TOML file, that's TOML. I'll show you both coming up. Let's start with bl_info. This is the approach you'll see in a lot of existing tutorials and in many add-ons as well. And at the very top of your script, before import BPY, we're going to have to type in some information. First of all, bl_info. We're going to use the equal symbol. We're going to assign it. And I said earlier, it's going to be a dictionary. So for that, we need curly braces. And in between the curly braces, we can start adding in the contents of this dictionary. Now, we don't have to include everything that bl_info can contain. If I look down my list here, we've got name, author, version. That's the version of your Blender add-on. The description of the add-on, the version of Blender that you can use, the location, where to find it in the UI, whether it's part of, let's say, a view, object, 3D menu, whatever it happens to be. Warning, and warning text that shows in orange within the preferences itself. We can include a doc URL. I'll make sure all of these are in the description so you can reference them if you need to. But first of all, we need to basically do what's called a key value pair in a dictionary. So I'm going to press tab and I'm going to type in name, but we don't do it just like that. It's not a variable. We need to put it inside quotation marks. So we go name. At the end of that, we use the colon to separate the key and the value. And then we need to give it the name. So let's go ahead inside quotation marks. We're going to type in scene setup for the moment. And of course, you can change this depending on what you're actually doing with your add-on. Now, at the very end, we need a comma because this is going to be a list of key value pairs. What else might we want here? Well, let's put in the author and then colon, and I'm going to type in my name and you would type in your name here, etc. The next thing that we'd need to do is go ahead and add a comma onto the end. It's very easy to forget that. If you do that, everything will appear to work without a problem, but it will just not work. So, version. Now, a version is the version of your add-on, not the version of Blender that we are currently using or that you're developing for. Now, this is not going to be in quotation marks. This is going to be what's known as a tuple, which is an unmodifiable list. This is version 1 of our add-on, so we can type it in like that, 1.0 essentially. And then we've got Blender. What Blender version is this available for? What's the minimum version? Now, because I'm writing this in version 5, I would put the minimum version as, let's say, 5.0.1, because that's the version of Blender I'm currently in. And I've got a bit of a weird spacing there. Something along those lines. Now, a couple of other things that I definitely want to include. I want to include a description. This will come up in the preferences window and tell people what this actually does. This is going to be in a string. So let's go ahead and, well, it's almost the same as this down here with our tooltip. It will clear the scene, deleting all objects, then adds in Suzanne the monkey. Okay, the final one that I'm going to add in at this point in time is the category. What is it doing? Well, I could actually call this a scene category. Is there scene? Yes, there is scene as a category. So let's do that. Let's do category, then a colon. And I've already spotted I've done this. I've raced through. These need commas after all of them. Otherwise, it won't work. So the category, what do we need here? I'm going to put in scene because it's affecting the entire scene. We could modify this later on, and let's say we're going to add in the camera and lights that we want to add in. And so we're going to select an object and then put camera and lights around that. This might be more of an object category. You do have to sometimes just pick one if there's kind of a crossover. I'm going to pick scene. And then finally, this curly brace, I'm going to bring it in just one level like so. Now, this final one, whether or not there's a comma there is entirely up to you. We can leave it there so that next time we use this, we can add in another key if we need to. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this under text. Save, that is saved and ready to use. Now, in theory now, this is a standard add-on ready to use. Let's close down Blender completely and add it to the add-ons. So with a fresh version of Blender open, let's go ahead, Preferences, Add-ons. Once we've done that, let's go down to the drop down and install it from disk. Go to where we've saved it and install from disk. Now you'll also notice here, clear the scene, deleting all objects, then add Suzanne the monkey. That was our description that we've added in. We can see that it's here, and if we can toggle it on and off. We will notice here it says legacy because we built it as an older add-on, and we'll get to the TOML file next. But now what we should be able to do is press F3, and we can see it right at the top there. But if we didn't know where it was and had to search for it, we could do scene setup, and it's the third one down there. Let's click that. And there we go. We've actually created an older version of add-ons. Now let's modify it with a TOML file instead. Now let's have a look at the modern approach. Blender 4.2 introduced the extension system, which uses a separate file called blender_manifest.toml. TOML stands for Tom's Obvious Minimal Language. It's a configuration file format designed to be easier to read. The key difference, instead of the metadata being inside your Python file, it lives in a separate file alongside it instead. Okay, so we've got the old version working. Let's have a look at the TOML file. And we're going to need to do a tiny bit of rearranging and organization in order to do this. First of all, let's go ahead and uninstall the old version. So under the preferences, under add-ons, find your scene setup and uninstall it, just so we don't have any confusion over which version is where. The next thing we need to do is go ahead, and this is a brand new file, so it's not in here. So let's go ahead and open that up. I can go here into intro and phase 1, and we've got the clear scene and add Suzanne Python file. This needs to be named something differently, and it needs to be placed in a folder by itself so we can have things together. First of all, let's just tidy this up. We don't need the BL info anymore, and we don't need the if name equals main anymore either. There are two options here. We can delete it, or we can go ahead and just comment it out. And that's what I'm going to do for the moment. So I can just flick backwards and forwards if I need to. Control and / with those items highlighted. Okay, with that done, I'm going to go to the text menu and save as. We're just going to create our own folder here. I'm going to go up a level, and we're going to call it clear scene and add Suzanne. So I'm going to click this little folder icon, clear scene and add Suzanne. Now that we've done that, this doesn't need to be called clear scene and add Suzanne PY anymore. It needs to have a double underscore, INIT double underscore, sometimes referred to as dunder. Now that we've done that, we can save as. Now notice at the top here, it's not switched to that file. That's important because if we think we're saving to that file and we're not, well, we won't be. So let's go ahead and open up that other file that we've just made. There we go. We've got the init.py. Now, there are a couple of ways we can make the TOML file. I'm going to make it inside Blender as well. I'm going to make this part full screen. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. Let's go to text and new. And this needs to be called Blender Manifest. So Blender _ manifest.toml. Now, because we've typed the full file name in there, now when we go text, save, we can go to that file location just where we've stored our init file and just save as, and it will have the right file name to begin with. Now, this is going to have a certain format. There are 9 fields that are required and 3 that are optional. The first one is called the schema version. So schemia_version. And this is like a variable, and then we give it something to assign it, and we're going to have 1.0.0. Now, this schema version is telling us how we need to format any of our version numbers. So whether that's the add-on version number or Blender version number later on. And I've added an extra I in there. So schema version, like that. I'm going to add an extra space in. The next field we need is ID. Now, the ID is what we're calling it internally, which was scene_setup. And you'll notice a lot of parallels from what we did before as well. Version. This is entirely up to you, but this is going to be version 1 of our clearing scene add-on. Next, let's do the name of the add-on. And this is simply going to be scene setup. And then the author. Now, I've forgotten the assignment there. Let's make sure that that is there like so. The next one is the description, but we don't call it description. We call it tagline. And we're going to set that to whatever we had before. I can't remember what it was. Clear the scene, deleting all objects, and then adds Suzanne the monkey. So we can flick between our open files with our little drop down in the center here, back to the Blender manifest, and I'm going to press home to go all the way back to the beginning. Line 7. Much like before we had author, this time it's the maintainer. Now, the maintainer has a certain type of formatting, so I could type in my name right here, and then if I wanted an email address for people to email, this could be a company address or whatever, we could go here and type in our email address like so. Okay, next. What are we on? We're on 6. We've got 3 more to do. Type. This is an add-on. I believe the other one is theme, and we're not making a theme, so this is an add-on. Blender version, the minimum Blender version, so it's Blender_version_min, and this we have to match our schema at the top here, which is going to be 5.0.1. I could just do Blender version 5.0.0, but I could not do Blender 5.0. That would not work. The final one here is our license, and I'm going to split it out because it's formatted in a slightly different way to everything else. It's going to be an array of various strings, and the strings have to be formatted in a certain way as well. So first of all, it's an array, so we want our square brackets. Then we want quotation marks, and then the license itself has to have an SPDX prefix. So an example of this, and by the way, I will make sure as normal, there's a link in the description to the guidance, the Blender manual basically on how to do this. But here's a GPL 3.0 or later formatted license. Now, if you did have multiple licenses, you would just separate them out like so and include them in the list. We don't. We're just going to stick to the one license here, but it does require a license. Now I'm going to press Alt and S to save that, and we can just check that it is indeed saved. Yes, we saw it come at the bottom there. So hopefully that's all sorted. But one of the warnings I will give is if we make a typo here and it doesn't work as expected, you absolutely need to shut down Blender fully and restart Blender. Otherwise, Blender will cache the mistake that you had and you'll think that you're correcting things. And in fact, you just sit there for hours and don't ask how I know this. Ooh. Right. So now that I think that everything's here and sorted, we need to go to our file system and just zip this up into one package. So I'm going to go scene setup. I'm going to copy that. So I've got something to name my zip file. And now I'm going to use File Explorer. Go to the appropriate area, which is this one here. I'm going to highlight both of these, press right click and compress to a zip file. This will be slightly different if you're on a Mac or a Linux computer. Once you've done that, you'll want to give it a name. I'm not going to name it init. I'm going to name it scene setup like so. You could leave it like that, but I prefer naming things so people can read them. Let's go back over into Blender. Right, let's go to Edit, Preferences. This time get extensions because we've done it in the modern way of doing our extensions or add-ons. Install from disk, go to the appropriate place. We've got our scene setup zip that we made. That's the one that we want. Make sure that that is selected and click install or just double click it. And there we go. We've got scene setup right there. And you can see here, clear the scene, deleting all objects, then add Suzanne the monkey. Now you'll notice here it says permissions, no permissions specified. You can actually specify a series of permissions if you want to, but that's outside the scope of this add-on. It's a very simple add-on, so it's unlikely to ever need additional permissions, but you can scope them, and you can read all about that in the Blender docs. And now that we've installed it, let's just make sure it still works as we would expect it to. In fact, let's start a brand new Blender file. If we press F3, it should be there for us. The scene set up. Fantastic. Let's close Blender and reopen it. Excellent. With that there, let's press F3. And again, it's at the top ready for us to use. Fantastic. So our add-on is working as expected. Or should I say extension now? I don't think I'm going to drop the word add-on for quite some time. Right, so when do you use each approach? And no, I definitely didn't forget to change top for the last take. Anyway, I would use the BL info when building personal add-ons for yourself, quick scripts, things like that, things you want to install easily for testing, and of course, supporting Blender versions before 4.2. And also learning it's a bit simpler because it's all just in one file. Now, a TOML manifest, I would use that when distributing Blender through Blender's extension platform, building add-ons for others to download and use, and you want proper versioning and update support, and of course working exclusively with Blender 4.2 onwards. Now, for this tutorial, I would just pick whichever one you want to roll with, and I might stay with the TOML file since it's now all set up, but there's no harm just using the BL info since it is simpler. And you know both approaches exist, so now you can choose depending on what you are doing. Now, one of the questions that actually started this whole thing was, if I write a script, how do I assign a hotkey to it? Well, we do have to go through the process of creating the add-on stage. Now, you could just leave this as the BL info type, but if we go over into Blender and go to Edit, Preferences, once you've installed that add-on, we can go to the key map section. So make sure you've gone to the key map tab. Then we need to scroll down. We need to be under 3D view and global, so we can be anywhere in the 3D view. And then when we use our shortcut key, it will hopefully work. Let me just move this over to one side so nothing is covered up. So we need to go to the bottom of this list and click Add New. Once we've done that, let's click the little drop down and start working on this. First of all, where it says none, we need to go find what we did earlier. And if you remember, that was object.scene. And there we go. It's at the top, scene setup. So there is our add-on. Now we just need to assign a hotkey. I'm going to go Shift, Control, and Alt, and probably the S key for scene. How's that? Okay, we've done that. We can save our preferences if we want to. Let's start a brand new Blender file. And you'll have to trust me on this. I'm pressing Control, Shift, and Alt, and S. And there we go. We're running our script just using a hotkey. That is fantastic. And so many uses of this as well. If you do the same thing day in, day out, this is a perfect way of taking a basic script and being able to just use a hotkey to run it. You now have a Python script that automates a task wrapped in an operator so Blender recognizes it packaged as an add-on. And you know both the traditional BL info and the modern TOML manifest approach. Triggered by a custom hotkey, this is the same structure used by every add-on in Blender. From simple scripts to complex tools, everything else is just adding more features on top of this foundation. And there we go, we've got it all sorted. But I'm not going to stop there. We're going to flesh this out now with the tools that we've used and make a really nice add-on that you get to keep and use in all of your projects. Before writing code, let's have a look at what we're building. Then we'll build it and then capture the needed commands. Now, eventually, we're going to be creating this 3-point lighting setup, and it probably will be a bit different after we start playing with it. I've just set up a real basic one here. We've got our camera looking at our object that we want to be able to render. Then we have a key light. Now, the key light is the main source of light. And in this case, I've colored it in blue so that we can see its effect. It's much easier to see the lighting on an object when you've got it colored. It also looks pretty cool. On the other side, we have a fill light. This is just to make sure that the shadows aren't too harsh and fill in the other side of our Suzanne. And then finally, at the back, we have a backlight, or it's also called a rim light. If we have a look from the camera view, we can see it highlights the edge of parts of Suzanne. And that is critical to be able to actually make things stand out from the background. And this is an incredibly common setup. And if you look online for a 3-point lighting setup, you can tweak this to match real-world examples. If I go to my camera view quickly, we can just make this area at the top a little bigger, and then I can turn off the lights. So this is Suzanne unlit. So we've just got the world environment here. We could even make that black right now so that there is no light in the scene. I don't like it just pure black because it's hard to find other objects in the scene, especially lights, but we'll leave it black just for this example. Let's turn on the key light. You can see this lights up our object really well. And then we've got our fill light. We turn that on. Suddenly the shadows on this side of our object are then lit. So those are the two main lights. But in order to make something jump out from the background, we turn on that rim light that really adds to our setup. And of course, at any point you can grab your light. And again, here is why I don't like it completely black, because it's very difficult to see the outlines of your objects. I can grab this light and move it around and perhaps have the rim light over this side, over the top. You can really start to tweak things to your heart's content. So now that we know what we're putting together, let's go through the process of extracting the information we need, all the Python commands, so we can start putting this together. Okay, so when working out any sort of add-on that you want to create, or indeed any script that you want to create, the first thing that I do is run through it manually. Now we have a default scene in front of us here. I'm going to press F3 and do my scene setup. So I just get Suzanne in the scene. If you've not saved your add-on, that's absolutely fine. Just delete everything in the scene and add Suzanne. The next thing that we want to do here is add in a camera. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go Shift and A, go down to camera and just add the camera in. Now the camera is going to be right in the middle of the scene to begin with. Now, when I end up setting up cameras in my scene, I press 0. And then I use Shift and the Grave key, which is next to the one on most keyboards, unless you're a Mac user. It's next to your left Shift. And then I can just pull this camera out using WASD and Q and E to adjust and set it up something along those lines. Now, that's not perfect, but that's fine for this. We're just setting up a rough estimate. And then if we have a look real quick, in fact, what we could do is make this area here a little bit bigger and switch it to the info pane. We can see down here that we've added in our camera, and we'll be using that bit of code later on to automatically add a camera in. The next thing we need to do is add in some lights. So I'm going to do that. Shift and A. Let's go ahead, add in a light. Now, it depends on what you want to set up. I'm going to use area lights because then we can talk about setting up a direction as well. If you are just creating a basic light scene, you might want a point light, which is going to light up everything around your object as well. So area light is going to spawn into the center of the scene. Now I'm going to look down upon this, go Shift and D and place one behind, basically making a kind of L shape around our object like so. Now you can have this rim light that'll be at the back over here if you want. That's entirely up to you. So generally speaking, your rim light and your main light, your key light, are going to be opposite one another. So I'm going to highlight this, press F2 and name this key. I'm going to name this other one up the top here, making sure it is active and selected. I'm going to name this one rim. And then finally, this one down here, I'm going to name it fill. So we've got our three lights. Now they're not pointing at our object yet, so that's the next thing I'm going to do. Easiest way of doing this is to look at it from, let's say, the side and rotate it round until it's passing through your object. Now, there is another way of approaching this, and we'll talk about that in a moment because it makes it more programmatic. But if you were just basically setting up your scene like so, you could go through and manually configure it like this. And now all the lights are pointing. Now, if you had some heights to your lights, they're all on one plane at the moment, you'd go to your final axes and just move it so it passes through your object like so. In fact, I might do that. Where have we got our key light here? Yeah. Let's move that up ever so slightly and put it going through our object. Now, I don't know if that is going through, not quite. And there we go. Now, this isn't a hard and fast rule. This is just a quick way of setting things up. Now we have a look at our object really quick and go to rendered mode, either cycles or Eevee, that's entirely up to you. We can't see it being lit up, and that's because of the power of those lights. And notice how far these are away as well in terms of distance. They're about 9 or so meters away, I should imagine. The 10th part being around here, if I can count correctly. If I zoom out, yeah. So that's 10 by 10 just there. So this is about 8-9 meters away. So selecting our key light, I'm going to go down to our light properties. And this is also something we can have a look at in a moment. We're going to need to set the power. I'm going to set this one at 800. There we go. We can see our object is lit up. I'm going to set this one at 500 and then this one at the back, maybe 200. Those are good ballpark figures to begin with. And of course, if you need to, you can adjust those later. Now let's have a quick look at our object, turning the lights on and off as we go. So if we turn everything off, we get this dark gray. This dark gray is coming from the ambient light. So we can go to the world light and turn down the color. Again, I don't want to set it all the way to black unless I really want to just look at the lighting, because then it's really difficult to see any of the other elements in the scene. And let's turn on the fill light. There's our fill. Let's turn on the key light. There's our key. And you can see here, if we add in the fill light, it brings up the shadowed areas. And then finally, we've got the rim light as well. Now, the reason why I colored these in earlier is just so you can see the distinct lights. You can always adjust them back later on. And let's do that now. Let's go to our lights. Let's go to the key light. Set that as, let's do amber and teal this time. So let's set this as a slight blue. No, let's set this one as the amber, so a slight orange hue. And then if we go to our fill light, set this one to a slight blue, something like that. That looks pretty good. And then the back one we're going to leave as a white light. However, I can't really see it at the moment. There's not really any edges facing the back. So I'm just going to use a subdivision surface modifier. I'm going to press Control and 3 on Suzanne. And then finally, I'm going to shade auto smooth as well. Let's see if that rim light is highlighting those edges. There's a slight rim just around here. We may need to increase the brightness or change how it's hitting our object. We may need to just lift that up slightly so it's pointing back and down at our object. So we highlight those top areas of the object. So let's just move that back down that way. Have a look. Yes, that's better. We've got the highlights hitting these edges now. Perfect. So we've got a basic 3-point lighting setup. And what we want to do is mirror this using Python code. We've got all of the stuff we need now in the info. And we don't need to copy and paste everything. But there are certain things that we're going to end up repeating ourselves with as well. So we've got it manually set up. Now let's go through the code and see how we can work out how to do this programmatically. Not exactly how we did it manually. That would be very laborious and inefficient code. It's not necessarily wrong code, but it's probably not best practice to just go through and copy everything, except when you're just playing around. Let's dive in. So moving over, let's go to our scripting workspace, and we're going to need this area here quite a bit. Let's go find all of the various things that we've done here. We can see that we could change the value of the world, node trees. So that's the background. So we can set that dark and light. That could be potentially useful. And then we've got this thing here, bpy.context.object.data_energy. Now, bpy.context.object is whatever is selected. So that's going to be useful coming up, because what we want to be able to do is select Suzanne or whatever object you're trying to light, and then apply the things based upon that. So we'll need to get things like the object's location, so we can move the light to an appropriate location around that object as well, assuming it's not at the origin of our world. So there's a lot of information here. It can be quite overwhelming, but remember, we don't need everything. Now let's go to the top. Okay, so here we have our ops object camera add. So we're going to need that. Let's copy it. Let's go back to previous. I'm just going to paste these in for the moment as they are. And I'm using Control and space over the window that I want to become full. Now here we have our light. We can see it's bpy.ops. It's an operation object light add. Type is an area, which is the type we picked. And then in this, I don't actually see a rotation. So that's something we're definitely going to have to do later on. But let's copy that. Now, basically, if we were to just add 3 lights into the scene, we just need this bit of code 3 times. So that a repetition of code might mean we need to do a function to add a light. And then we can just run that function whenever we need to do something. However, we'll come back to that in a bit. So we've got our lights being added and our camera being added. Then it's just about moving things. So let's have a look at what happens when we were moving things earlier. So we duplicated. We don't need to do that because we'll just programmatically add the lights in rather than duplicating. Let's scroll down a little further. Then we moved something. So we did an operation transform translate. Now we're not going to do exactly that, because what we're going to do is we're just going to change the object's rotation and its location. Separate things. And as we saw lower down, but here again, bpy.context.object. So as long as we've got an object selected, we can then do things like name it. We can see here this was named Area 3, Area 001, etc. So we can change the name of our objects, and I suggest we do that straight away so we know which ones we're referring to. And then we've just got to rotate, and here we can see the bpy.ops.transform rotate. Now, the reason why we're going to approach this slightly differently rather than just using the operations is because when you use an operation, bpy.ops, you run the risk of, if you're doing lots of stuff, because you're actually manipulating the UI using Python, of a massive load of slowdown. So where we can, we avoid bpy.ops. Adding an object to the scene, fine. It's not going to really slow anything down. If you're adding 10,000 objects to a scene, you might want to reconsider how you approach that. And then the rest of this is just us moving things around. I'm going to grab a couple of things out of here. I'm going to grab the data energy. I think that will be useful to programmatically change that. So that's a light element. What else do we have down here? bpy.context.spacedata context equals the world. So what is the context in which we're going to change things? I'm going to copy that. That might be useful later on. And then what's the next thing here? This is changing the values of the world background. Now, some of these things you could rename at the beginning. Otherwise, you just keep them as default. And you'll notice here, there's a couple of different ways of selecting things. Here, we're selecting the worlds by its name. So if we go to this worlds tab, it's called world. And so that's what it's referring to there. We're selecting it by its name. We could also probably select it by its index. And that's what's happening over here, inputs 0. So if we go down to here, this color selection is inputs 0. And this is talking about a node. Now, one of the things you may or may not be aware of is in the shading tab. If we have a look at the top here, we've got object shading and we've also got world shading. And we can see that it's referring to this node. It says background. If we jump back to here, nodes background, okay, inputs 0. We go back to the shading workspace. Input 0 is our color, and we're just changing the values of the color here. In this case, we're just changing the literal value up and down. So if we set that a bit higher and go back to our script and go down here, go all the way to the bottom because it's the last one we've done, we can see that it's changing all 3 of those values in this set of 4 values. It's changing them all to be the same, which will just be a grayscale up and down. Okay, let's carry on. I'm getting too deep into the weeds there, but I hope you found that interesting. Let's have a look further down. I think we've got everything else absolutely fine. All of this is just me manipulating Suzanne and changing the color of the lights. So that actually might be useful as well. So we've got bpy.context.object.data color. So this is all about changing the values of things that are selected. We're unlikely to go and select something and then change the value. That'll be doing a manual manipulation. What we're more likely to do is go ahead and say this light has this color. So we don't have to do that selection in between. But what I will do is I'll just copy that. So we've got a little bit of a reminder and keep it up here with the light data. Okay. So we've got a set of Python here. Now we just need to go through it and work out what we want to do in our world. Right, so with everything set up, the next thing we need to do is just work out if we can add all of these things with the code that we have into the scene. Not necessarily in the position, but what we want to do is add a camera and add 3 lights. So what do we need here? We've got our camera add at the very top. I reckon if we just leave that as is, it will come into the scene. And then we've got adding a light. So let's comment everything else out. So by highlighting everything, pressing Control and /, you get this hash symbol or the pound symbol in front of your code that comments it out. And you can also use this later on if you wanted to just make notes in your code itself. Now, nothing will actually work here unless we have import bpy at the very top. So those are the basic structures that we need. Now, the type area is going to be important. Align world and everything else in its location. We're going to move this later on. So I can actually get rid of everything apart from the type and maybe not even the radius because we might adjust that later on. So let's just do the type of light more than anything else. And the camera. We're not entering. In fact, let's just dump everything here as well out and sort out the movement of these things later on. Now, I just tried to delete there, and this will happen occasionally as I'm moving my mouse around the screen. If your cursor goes outside of where you're typing, it's not going to work. So let's just press delete again. Now, hopefully what this will do is add everything to the scene. Now, there's a couple of options we can do here. I could remove everything else from the scene. Now we've got the information that we need and we know what we're going for. Or I could potentially create a new scene to work on so we can go back and refer to this one if necessary. Now, because of the simplicity of it, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to create a separate scene. But if you did have quite a complex setup, you can come up to the top right and create yourself a new scene at the top here. I don't want to do that. I want to keep it simple. But what I will do at this point is delete our lights and camera from the scene. So let's get rid of the lights. And there is one further light just there. Okay, perfect. So if we have a look at our outliner, we've got one thing in our scene, Suzanne. Now, if I go ahead and press play, we've got a problem. What does this say? This says we've got an indeterminate string literal detected at line 6. And that's because when I typed in the single apostrophe, it put in the extra one for me. I should have noticed that. That will happen. Let's go ahead and run. Excellent. So we've got our area light and our camera in our scene. Now, for the moment, we're just going to work with one light and one camera. And then later on, we can have the other two lights coming in. The reason for that is there's no point at the moment making lots of extra code just to suffice the extra lights. We'll deal with that as we come to it. Let's be able to position things first, and then we'll work on the others. The next thing that we want to do here is start moving things. Let's start with the camera. So after we've added the camera, it should be active because we've added it. So we can then go ahead and perhaps rename it if we need to. We can pop it into a collection if we need to, but let's just focus on where we're going to put it. I think having an area at the top for the moment, a variable called camera location, something along those lines, and we're going to give it a tuple. I keep forgetting that we've got the extra brackets there, so there we go. So we want it, let's just say on the Z-axis it's going to be 0, so it's going to be flat. We're just going to move it along the Y-axis in the negative direction. And on the X, it will still be 0 in the middle. So it's going to be 0. I'm going to go comma. Oh, look at that. My cursor's in the wrong place. Let's try again. 0, comma, -5. About there, perhaps. And then finally, also 0 on the Z-axis. So here we have a tuple that we can pop into the camera's location. So in theory, because it will be selected, it will be the active object. We don't want to rely on this always, but we should now be able to go bpy.context.object, because it will be the active object once it's added. I'm going to guess this. We should really test it out, though. So let's make sure that the camera is selected like we think it will be. bpy.context.object. If we go ahead and do that, it will return the camera, which is good. That's exactly what we want. Now if we go .location, we get its location. And we see here it's a vector with a tuple inside it. Now, this is going to cause us a problem if we just try and pass in the camera's location. And the way that we get the vector, this is one of the downsides of using this console down here, is that we've already imported from math utilities everything. And I'm pretty sure that's where vector exists. So if we go ahead and copy that and put it at the very top here, we'll be able to use vector itself. So that's what we can do here. We can go to camera location equals, and then we can do a vector and then just pop everything inside parentheses like so. Now, if I copy this and paste it down here, we've now got the variable camera location that we can use. So hopefully what we'll be able to do is go bpy.context.object.location. And what do we want to do? We want to set it to what we've already made as the camera location. And it's moved to the right place. Perfect. That's exactly what I want to see. Now, what we could do later on is we could have the camera location not as a vector here and then pop it into a vector later on. That's entirely up to you. That's a code style thing rather than anything else. But let's go ahead and finish this off. .location. And then what do we need to do? We need to assign it the value of the camera location. So I will at this point just press tab to autofill. But what we could do here is instead of having it be a vector at the top here, this is what I mean. We can go vector down here and then add the camera location in like so. Now, hopefully, when we delete everything from our scene, oh, we don't want to delete Suzanne. Let's delete the camera and the area. Now, when we press play, hopefully the camera will be in the right place. Perfect. And now we need to do a similar thing for the rotation. So we will be rotating this on a global x-axis by 90 degrees like so. We have a look at our options down here. We get a bpy.ops.transform.rotate. Now, if you remember earlier, I was talking about not using ops if we can avoid it. So what we need to have a look at is there a bpy.context.object.rotation? And there is. And you see there's a couple of options down here. One of them is Euler, and that's the one that we are going to use. Now notice here that it has 1.57. That's a really odd number. I'm pretty sure we typed in 90 degrees. What's going on there? Well, in mathematics and in computer programming, often you use radians and not degrees. So we could use a function to transform that. But if we type in pi down here, we get 3.142. And if we do pi divided by 2, we get 1.57. So pi is 180 degrees. 2 pi or tau is 360. And then finally, half of pi or pi over 2 is 1.57. And that is why when we type in 90 degrees, we get 1.57 just here. So then we can come in and use that information that we have. In fact, I can just right click and copy it and bring it up here for reference. So what we want is to basically do the camera underscore rotation, and we can assign that what's in here basically. So let's go ahead and grab that and pop that up here. We save that, make sure that everything is deleted. Now, it might be worthwhile that if we're doing this repeatedly, we actually set it up in our script that we automatically delete these things before doing it, and then maybe run our add-on before doing the rest of the stuff. But for the moment, let's just delete everything in the scene and run our code. Now it's come in, the light's facing down, the camera has not rotated because we've not done the final thing, which is down here, do bpy.context.object rotation this time, and then have the vector be the camera rotation like so. So let's go ahead and pop that in. Camera. Oh, I've not spelt rotation properly. This is a good thing with autofill, but bad with my spelling. Right, let's go. Let's press play. Something's not working. It has no attribute rotation. That's absolutely fine. Let's go through and delete the extra things we have in our scene and just run it again in case it was something else in the scene. We run our code, no object. So it's saying here that bpy.context.object rotation is not a real thing. Let's go find out what it should be. Rotation Euler. We already discovered this earlier on. So rotation underscore EULER. Let's save that and then run our code. And there we go. It's in and working. Now, I like this type of raw thing. I don't like being perfect all the time, which I could do with editing. And this is a real world how I would start approaching this type of problem. Now, I obviously know the end goal in mind, and our code will change as we go through. But what I'd like you to now do, knowing what we've done so far, is I'd like you to do a little bit of a challenge where you step away from the video and you try and set up the light in a similar manner. It's basically copying what we've already done here, but you're going to go through the process of moving the light. Let's set it up as the key light, and let's set it up over here at 10.10.0. Or maybe, no, let's do, so it's minus 10 on the Y and plus 10 on the X in this particular case. So let's set it up so it's roughly level with this light here at 5 units. So let's move it 5 on the X, minus 5 on the Y, and then let's lift it up by 2 or 3 units. And then we'll work on pointing that light. And this is where it gets really exciting because we can have something that's dynamic, but we'll point the light at our object. Pause the video and give that a go. How did you get on? I hope everything went well for you, and doing this sort of challenge really does help solidify what we're doing and helps you learn better. Now, if you do want to learn more about Python in Blender, then I do have a dedicated course for that. We will just be glossing over some of the things as we go through this. I know it's an already long video, and hopefully we'll wrap it up in not too long a time. But if you do want to learn more about Python in Blender, do check out the course in the description below. See you there. Right, so going back to the code here, one of the things that I did not do after saying all about pi and everything is actually having this being pi divided by 2. However, what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to put in, instead of pi divided by 2, I'm going to be saying 0.5 times pi, like so. And the reason for that is so that it is a little bit faster when it comes to computation. Simply put, if you divide or you subtract, it can end up taking a little bit longer to do in the background in the code. So I'm just going to do 0.5 times pi. However, if you went pi divided by 2, that's absolutely fine. Now, of course, before I do anything else, I'm going to delete those two elements and run my code again and just make sure that ends up in roughly the right place. Have I added in too many? Yes, I've added in too many parentheses. Oh, pi is not defined. So pi is another one of these things from math import everything. And whilst we're talking about this, there's a couple of ways in which you can approach imports. So we're importing two modules here. Well, we're not importing the modules as such. What we're saying is from these modules, import everything, which isn't the same as going import math utilities. If we typed in import math utilities or import math, we wouldn't be able to use just vector or pi. What we would have to do is mathutilities.vector and math.pi. So by formatting it in this way, we're saying from math, import everything. So now I can just use pi. We press play, it appears in the right location. Fantastic. Let's get rid of those and work on the light. So we then go ahead and add a light in. Now this is very functional code at the moment. We're not putting functions in to do all of this for us. We'll tidy that up later. When you're testing, when you're more experienced, sure, jump in, make functions, make classes, which we'll get to later on. But for the moment, we're just going to be focused on making sure our code works in a simple manner before we make it any more complex. It's as simple as that. So we've got this area here, which is doing the camera basically. So I'm going to put hash and call this camera setup because that is what it is. And it helps frame our code. And then let's do hash light setup. Now we've got some comments in our code actually adding to what is happening. Now, ideally, you will write your code in a manner that is really explicit. It's clear as to what's happening anyway. But for the sake of clarity here, I'm going to make sure that everything is labeled as we go as well. So we've added a light. We know how to move something. So at the top here, I'm going to give fill underscore light location. It's quite a long name, but what we're going to do is, what did I say? 5, -5, and 2, something like that. I'm just going to add a bit of white space around here as well. And that is just for readability, nothing else. And then the rotation. Now we're going to deal with the rotation lights later on. However, for the moment, I think it's a good idea that we go through and just copy what we did before so we learn how this is set up. So light rotation, there we go. And this, I don't really know what it will be. So what we could do is do that manually, but I'm going to get the light in the right location first, comment out this line and come back and just set up the rotation afterwards. We need something more dynamic in the end because if the light's at a different position, we need it to match. And we'll do something really clever with a constraint later on in order to get that information. So now that we've done that, we just need to set the object's location. So again, because it's just been added, we can use the context that it's just been added and it will be the active selected object. So we could use exactly the same code because it will be highlighted, it will be selected. We can set its location to vector, and then we just pass in the fill light location like so. So let's make sure that works. It does, perfect. Let's look at our light and just make sure it's passing through our object so we get a rotation information that we can use. So here we go. We've got we've got a lot of information there, but what we can now do is have a look at its properties. Oh, we do need to rotate it on the Z-axis as well. So now we should be pointing through our object. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. Hang on, can we grab that around and snap it to objects? Ooh, right. I'm not going to play with that. Let's open up the properties panel because here we will have some rotation information. So we have the rotational information here. Now the question is, how do we convert these degrees to radians? Well, there is actually a command for that. I'm just going to clear down the console. And if I do, I believe it's under math utilities, but if we do DEG degrees 90 and we pop that in, that's convert angle X from radian to degrees. So that would be like our 1.57 will be roughly 90. Okay. So now if we type in radians and type in 90, this should convert it to the appropriate number. Perfect. But what we could do here is fill light rotation and we're going to have radians. open up our parentheses and put in our X coordinate, which is 53.015. We can probably just do 53. I'm going to keep it simple. And then once again, radians, open our parentheses, and I'm just going to call that 62 degrees. And then finally, we've got another radians, and that is 12.3 degrees. So let's just do 12. Now, have I got too many parentheses there? I think I had. Okay, so now that we've got the fill light rotation sorted, we should be able to do exactly the same thing as we did before with the rotation that we need just here. Let's copy that, paste it down. And what we need to do is change the vector here from the camera rotation to the fill light rotation. Now, when you start writing out code like this and you see some repetition like so, and all we've changed here when it comes to our location and rotation is the name of the variable that we're passing through to these functions or methods. And this is important because this means that we should probably start using some sort of function in order to do this. So that's just something to put in the memory bank for later on. Right, let's clear the scene down, delete our camera, delete our light, and then just press play. Okay, did I mean radians? Yes, I did. Where have I mistyped this? This is line 9. Have I misspelt it multiple times? Randians. No, just radians. Thank you very much. Let's play that. And look at that. We've got everything set up. Let's look through the camera view and turn our lighting on. Okay, so we've got a very light background at the moment. Let's go back to previous and just have a look. Yes, I turned up the world value at some point before. And there we go. We've got our monkey, in this case, Suzanne, lit. Brilliant. So we've got our first core part here. We're able to add these objects in and control where they're facing. However, when it comes to controlling where they're facing, especially the lights, I want to have a bit less manual control and a bit more automation behind that. We're going to have to do a little bit of a deep dive and a kind of a trust me as we go through, because I'm not going to explain absolutely everything, but I will show you how we can use a constraint to point the light at our object, in this case Suzanne, and then also capture that data, its rotational data, so we can use it to position a light. We'll do that coming up next. Okay, so let's crack on with this. Before we go any further, if we have a look at the left-hand side here, you'll notice it's different from only a few moments ago. Unfortunately, Windows did an update whilst I was stepped away from the computer, so I've lost what was over there. But it doesn't matter. I had saved and we can get back up and running. But just know, if this area over on the side changes, it's either me doing a retake, I might have cleared the console, Blender might have crashed, or in this case, Windows did some updates. Okay, so we need to work out a way of tracking our objects up here using our lights. And we can do that. I'm going to reset the rotation with Alt and R of our lamp just here. I'm also going to set the scene to rendered mode so we can see it when it's lit up. And whilst I'm here, I'm also going to make the light just a wee bit brighter. I'm going to set it as, I don't know, 250. So we want this light to track our object. So if we go to our constraints, which is just above our light data properties here, we can select track to. When we do this, we just select our object. So remember, we've done two things there. We've gone and enabled the constraint track to, and then we've told it what to point at. And there we go. Our light itself is being pointed at our object. And if we open up the property panel, the N key, we can see here there isn't any rotation data. It's stored elsewhere, which is a little bit annoying that you can't just grab it, or indeed just select this and go Control and A and apply the rotation, because that's not going to actually apply a constraint. So we can leave it as constraints. That's absolutely fine. Or we can bake it down, and I'll show you that process, because this is really, really useful. Being able to have multiple lights set up like that and them actually point at the object you're trying to light up is incredibly useful. So we've got all the data that we need. I'm going to delete those extra objects, go back to previous. What do we need to do? Well, let's go to our Python list here that we've done. We've done some duplication. We've changed the brightness. I think we should probably do that as well, since we did it this time. We need to see that things are being lit up. So we've got this bpy.context space context equals constraint. We're not operating the UI like that though. But what we need though is to add this constraint to whatever the active object is, which will be the light. So we can use that. So I'm going to copy that. And then we've got our target here. So we can actually set what we're actually targeting. And of course, we're going to need that as well. But we don't have anything in our code at the moment that says what is selected and therefore should be the target. So right at the very top, before we do anything else, so before the camera setup, before the active object changes from Suzanne being selected, that is where we're going to need to actually store this object somehow. So what do we want here? Well, we want to call this the object to light. Now, if you want to, and you'll see a lot of code like this, you might even just see O or something like OTL, object to light. And providing that that is annotated somewhere, maybe with a comment, so object to light, so our initial selected, I think that's fine. I would prefer though, personally, because I'm the one reading my code, I'm the one having to maintain my code, and I can guarantee later on, when I come back to this, I might not know what OTL means. In fact, looking back at my script where I did do this, I prefer doing object to light. Yes, it's longer, but I think it's much, much clearer, and that's the most important thing. So we've got our object to light, and this is going to be our BPY dot. Now remember down here, bpy.context.object is what we need to use whenever we're doing the thing that's selected. We want to store it. So now we've got something that we can reference, which is going to be really useful in a moment. And I've just copied and pasted without actually grabbing this and pasting it in. So our bpy.object's constraint, so we need to add that to the light. So this, once it's added, will be selected, so we can add that line of code there. I'm just going to have a logical space between the two. You don't have to do that. Again, just a personal preference. So we've got the object to light, and then we have the track to here. So I'm going to copy that as well, right click and paste that in. And so far we've got the object to track being none. But if we set that as OB, and if I press tab, we've got the object to light there. So you can type that in a bit quicker, like so. So we've got our object to light. Let's see if this just lights our scene. I'm going to press play. Hey, look at that. And the light is pointing directly at our object. And that's exactly what I want to see. So we've got it aligned. We don't have the properties of the light being changed. And I did say we were going to do that. So I've got this here, this bit of code. Let's copy that and paste that in here. What did we set before? Was it 200, 150, 200, something like that? Let's just run our code. Okay, we've got the other light coming in. It's facing straight down though. Why? Because we are adding it and rotating. I don't know why it's not facing the right direction. Let's just remove everything and try again. There we go. That's pointing in the right direction. And if we start moving Suzanne around, interesting. Okay, I'm back again. It is behaving as expected. I think I had something else selected. I'd have to review the video. But yes, we select our object. We press play to run it. This has now added, and it's also had the object constraint there. I think it's because I had two lights in the scene that it decided to do something different. But we can see there, the target is Suzanne. And if we go ahead and move Suzanne this time, we can also see that the light moves as well. So we've got that bit there, but now we need a bit of code. If you wanted to lock in that and no longer have the light tracking it, what we need to do is look at a dependency graph. Now I've got the code over on the side. It's not something that I've actually used lots. Whilst developing this, I thought, aha, a good way will be to actually add in a constraint with a track to, and that just sets up all the rotation for us. And if you want to lock that in, you have to look at the dependency graph. As I mentioned earlier, we go N to look at the rotation of this object, of our light object here. Yes, that's got a rotation because that's the rotation we gave it just here, which is no longer necessary. So I'm going to comment that line out. And then when we go ahead, delete everything in the scene and run our code again, we have a look at this, it's pointing down. We didn't have Suzanne selected to begin with. If we run it again, it's pointed at the object. So there might be a reason to go ahead and add a warning that you have to have an active selected object before you start. Otherwise, it's got nothing to point to, and there's no way of correcting that after the fact. Well, not easily anyway. So now let's go ahead and get the dependency graph so we can bake in. So we select Suzanne, we press play. We've got this constraint here. How do we lock it in? So this is going to be accessing the dependency graph. So let's get our rotation. I think that's a good name for this because we're going to run a method called get. Let's go ahead, bpy.context.evaluated underscore DEPSGRAPH, dependency graph. I think that's right. Looks right. And we need to underscore get and open and close parentheses. So now we have that rotation data, but it's kind of stored in a weird way. So we kind of had to unpack and extract it. So in order to do that, I'm going to do rotation eval for an evaluation because we're looking at this dependency graph. So this will be bpy.context.object because it's the selected object dot evaluated underscore get open parentheses, and we need to pass in the get rotation. So now we've got the rotation, we now need to do a bit of matrix manipulation. Sounds complex? It's not. Don't worry. We need to store it somewhere. So let's do a rotation. And this will be bpy.object.context.object. I think this is starting to get a bit fragile. So let's just type it out anyway. bpy.context.object, so referring to the selected object. Now, the issue that I've got here is every time we're using this, if anything else gets selected, even if it was a longer process and a user clicked on something else, this would break. I would much prefer to refer to this light by name as soon as possible. So I think we should do that now rather than have this kind of fragile code. So where do we do this? After we've added the light in, we can do the bpy.context.object .name and assign it a name. In this case, let's assign it key light. I think that's probably what we want to do. So let's do key light like so. I'm just going to run my code and see if it comes in as key light. It does. That's the important thing, that bit works there. Now that we have bpy.object.context.name, what we can do is actually store what we're doing. So this is going to be the light that we're working on, and it's going to be the active object. Now that we've got that, every time we use bpy.context.object, we can now just go light. So we are referring to this key light every time, or whatever the object's name happens to be. So we've got light.location. And then light.energy. Does this not read so much better when we've done this? Let's continue down because this is one of the problems of doing it this way, bpy.context.object. So let's go light down here as well. Oh, make sure my cursor is in the right place. Now, I think here I can also do light. This may break. This is the wonderful thing about manual code. I wonder if I can do BP. No, that is separate. That is just a graph, but that one there, we can also do light to. And this one here, the rot equals the light. Well, at this point, this whole line becomes irrelevant. Does it not? No, it doesn't, because I never finished off typing what I wanted to type in. So this is going to be the object eval, which is the rotation eval above. So rotation eval like so, dot matrix underscore world. So we're accessing the matrix, but then we're making it an Euler so that it's easier to manipulate. We could also use, as we saw before at the top here when we were dealing with our options with the rotation, this is an Euler with an X, Y, Z configuration. We could also use things like a quaternion, and there are other things as we saw earlier. So let's just finish that off. And then finally, we want to get our light and we want to set its rotation underscore Euler to that rotation. Now, if you wanted to, you could certainly squish all this lot down. So we can say here, this, we just want to evaluate to this. So we could remove that completely and pop it in. I don't mind doing stuff like this, but just bear in mind, the more stuff you put inside itself, the more complex your code can become to read. So we've got this gets rotation, which we get here, but we could just drop that into here. And then this rotation eval just here, well, why not just drop all of this with that in it into here? Because it gets complex and it's easy for a typo or something else to just get lost in a C. I'm going to save my work there, and I'm going to select Suzanne and press play. Excellent. Something broke. Let's have a look. Constraint.add. I wondered whether or not that would work. I don't think it does because it's an operation that we were doing before. This is my fault here for not noticing that it was different. This should be bpy.ops.object. It's an operation on an object that's selected in the scene. Let's go ahead, delete everything, and then run our code. Oh, no, hold on a second. I've not got a dot in the right place there. Save, select Suzanne, run our code. Perfect. Everything's back up and running. And we've got something that's much easier to read. Now I'm going to just tidy up some of my extra white space here. I still like having a few gaps between logical differences. Here, we're setting up the light in terms of adding it to the scene, giving it a name. So it now has a name over on the side, and then assigning it a variable that we can use every time we need to do something to it. So we're changing its location and its light intensity. So I'm just going to lift that up one. I think those are 1 and 2 are the same. Then we're setting a constraint, a track to constraint, and we're telling it to focus on the object to light, which is whatever we had selected originally. Then we're going to get the rotation and evaluate that, and then finally apply the rotation to our object. So now if we have a look at the object properties, it actually has a rotation to it, which is fantastic. That's what we wanted to see. But it still has a constraint. So the final bit that we need to do is we need to remove the constraint from the object if we want to bake that angle in. And ultimately what we've just done here is to do that. So what we need to do is BPY. In fact, we don't need to type this in. Let's do it as we would do normally. If we go to our constraints and click the delete constraint, we'll find that under here we have, there we go, bpy.constraint delete. Let's go ahead and do that and paste that in. And here we go. We've got bpy.ops.constraint.delete. The constraint is a track to. We probably don't need that extra stuff. Let's go ahead, save. Let's delete the lights in the scene and run our code. I didn't have something selected. We do need to add some error checking for that. Let's go ahead, select our object, run our code. It's now pointed at it. And now with Suzanne selected, we can move her around the scene. And you can see here the light is no longer tracking. So if that's something that you want to be able to do, this part of code here is exactly what we need to do. This tracks to, so it focuses our lights onto the object, then changes the rotation of the light, and then when we remove that constraint, it essentially bakes in the rotational information of that light. Fantastic. Let's start creating a function. We need to do a bit of other cleanup as well, but we'll get to that in a moment. So this is going to be a function. So we type in the keyword def and then call it what we want. In this case, light_setup. I'm going to open parentheses and put a colon at the end. I'm going to highlight all the code that we want to go inside this function and press tab. Right. This function is going to have a series of inputs. I think one of the best ways of doing this is just to go through what we've done and make sure that we actually cover everything. So we've got the type, the name. So let's do type and then name. What else do we then have? This is an internal variable. It's not used outside, so we don't need to change that. Then we've got the location. We've got the energy, and I also want to include the color. Now, I am going to spell color this way. It hurts me, but it then matches the name that we're using later on. So we've got the type, name, location, energy, and color. Now, we need to replace all of where these are going to be used with inside our code. So this is going to be type equals type. This is going to be name equals name. Quite common sense. If I don't do this now, I will forget later, and it will cause me a headache. Our light location, well, we don't want to just use what's at the top here because that will mean that every time we call this code, it will just use the same value. In fact, this should have been key light. Anyway, I've obviously played around at some point. So this is just going to be location. The next one's going to be energy. And then finally, we don't have the light.data.color, but I'm going to assign that to color. Yes, it's down here, data.color. Color. So let's go ahead and grab the format. Well, we need to know what this is going to be, right? If we grab this color here, I don't know what it will be. We could go over to this side. We can see here, this is currently on the material preview of Suzanne. We can see it's 0.8, 0.8, 0.81. So it'll be on the grayscale close to white. The problem with this is it's got four values, and our light is only going to be expecting 3 values because there's no such thing as an alpha channel when it comes to light. So the easiest thing to do here will be to add it into our scene and just worry about the details later. Let's go up to the top and configure our lights so we can just call them. So we're going to have our location. We could have our energy up here as well. That'll probably be a good idea. As I mentioned a little while back now, I would like to break this out into its own data class. I don't think it's worthwhile doing it at this moment in time, but I do want to repeat the fact this isn't great when it comes to having lots of things. For the moment, as we're still testing and putting stuff together, this is absolutely fine. Wouldn't be absolutely fine as multiple light setups. So let's actually go through and complete this. And then finally the key underscore light underscore color, like so. This is going to need me to go and find out different colors. I'm just going to do 111 at the moment because I know that's white and that should work. And we'll do the rest of these in a moment once we've got some data. We're going to go through, we're going to add all of these things in. That all looks good to me. So now we need to call this function. And the way that Python works is it is read from the top to the bottom. So if you put this function at the bottom and other code above it, it's not going to work. Now, there are ways of making sure that it runs in a bit more of a logical manner, and then you can have all the functions below the code that you're running. I'm not going to faff around with that just at the moment. That's something we can approach later on. For the moment, let's go ahead and call our functions. So we've got a light setup function that calls the function. Now, if we were to go ahead and run our code, it would give us an error because I forgot to use the assignments just there. We could run our code again now and it will complain about it not having these positional arguments. So we've got the type, the name, the location, the energy, and the color. These all need to be declared. None of them are optional. So let's go through. We've got an area. And then we have our name, and this needs to be the key underscore light. What do we have next? We have location. Well, this is going to be the key light location. Then we've got the key light energy. And then I'm just pressing tab here, nothing special, on the key light color, like so. Now that's a bit long. So if you did want to format this differently, we could go ahead. This is what I typically do when there are lots of parameters to use. I will often do something along the lines of this in order to make sure things are lovely and clear. You could also go ahead and add in an extra line for your closing parentheses, just so it's on a different line. This is all personal style more than anything else. Now, if we were to delete everything from the scene unnecessary and run our code, it's kind of working. Lie is not defined. Okay, where have I typed this in? This is on line 33. Yes, this is just me. There we go. So that's in the right, well, it's not in the right place, actually. I think I've messed up my numbers at the top here. Key light location, this is supposed to be positive X, which is fine. We could run our code again now and see it on the other side. Perfect. That is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and have a look at what this looks like. Press the Z key and go to rendered mode. Okay, so we've got two white lights on there. Now, because this is red, green, and blue, if we just do red and green, we should get a yellow light. So if we change this to 1, 1, and 0, select Suzanne, press play, we do get a yellow Suzanne. Perfect. So that function is working as we would expect. And now that we've got this set of data here with the key light location, energy, and color, we just need to repeat that for the fill light location and then the rim light location. So with that in mind, let's select these, copy them. I'm going to give myself a bit of space between each one. This is going to be the fill light location. So let's type that in. And then the rim light location. Now, one thing you might want to do with something like this is you could have rim light name and then rim light type. In fact, I actually want to do that because this looks like a bit of magic rather than having it all at the top. I'm just fighting my urge to have lots of different things. It just feels a bit horrible. Let's do key light type and then key light name. And these are all going to be area lights for the moment. So let's have area at the top. Now we could just say if they are all going to be area lights, we could just have light type and define that once. I'm going to do that just to be a bit more optimal until at one point in the future, we'll discuss data classes. So this is going to be rim underscore light. This one's going to be fill underscore light. Now, obviously, all of this data would need to be typed in somewhere. So whether it's here or in a specialist file, that's entirely up to you. So I'm happy with everything here apart from the rest of these values. So let's go and find out what we need for the light color and these brightnesses. I'm just going to do 500, 300, 100. I do want an amber for the key light. So let's click on the light that's already here. We can use that and go to around here on the color wheel. Then we'll get some data down here that we can go ahead and copy. I might be able to just paste that in and then remove the extra bit. Yeah, that works perfectly well. Now that we've done that, let's find a blue or a teal type color, something along those lines. We don't want it to be too saturated. That's absolutely fine. Actually, we can preview it. You might want it, about there, I think. And again, once we've done that, we can just find the latest one, copy that, come down here and paste that in and remove the extra. And this is just going to be white, not yellow, but white. Okay, so the positions. The key light is coming in the correct location. The fill light's going to have a negative X to it. This is going to have a negative X, but a positive Y. And I want the rim light to be slightly higher. Okay, I've done a lot of changes there. We've not implemented them down below. So we've got our light set up. This is just one light. We need to change the variables that are being used. This is going to be the light type. And then we've got the key light name. There we go. So now we're passing in all of those. All we need to do is do this a couple more times. So we've got our light underscore setup. Now what we're doing at the moment is not going to be best practice. We're simply typing in these values and calling this function 3 times in order to make sure that our code is working. And don't worry, later on we are going to sort this out so that it is better practice than just repeating yourself multiple times. And we need to pass into it the following. Let's go ahead and pass in the light type, comma, and then we need the fill light name, the fill light location, the fill light energy, and then finally the fill light color. And then last but not least is going to be our rim light. So let's also run our light setup and then pass in the rim light information. So we've got the light type because once again, it's an area light and nothing else. Then we've got the rim light name and then the rim light location. I'm going to need to scroll down here because I'm not seeing everything. Rim light location, the rim light energy, and then finally the rim light color. Okay, I think that's everything that we need. Let's clear down our scene and then select Suzanne and run our code. Hey, brilliant. Now, I don't quite like the look of that at the moment. I don't know if it's the color that we've chosen or something along those lines. But regardless of that, let's just turn things on and off. Let's go to the layout view, switch to the camera, switch to rendered mode. And now let's just play with our lights and see what their contribution is. So the fill light, perfect. That is a blue. The key light, I think that could have a bit more color to it, actually, looking at it. So a bit more saturated. And the rim light, that's not bad. It's actually catching a lot of the areas that I would want. I may, in fact, want it brighter. But once we start tweaking this, that's kind of outside the scope of setting this up. I'm happy with the overall layout. What I'm actually going to do is I had a setup of this. I could change my colors around to this. But as you can see here, we're pretty much on the same ilk. This is just my manual setup to get an idea of colors, etc. So I quite like this here. And of course, you can tweak yours to your heart's content. There are lots of different color variations you can try. Okay, so instead of just jumping in and taking all the code we've got and making it a plugin, I want to approach this a slightly different way. We've not actually made UI elements to control our plugin yet. It's just run through the F3 and scene setup that we've done before. However, what I want to do is take us to this stage. So we can open up the properties panel. So we'll learn how to make a tab within the properties panel. And then we will have this add button lighting. Eventually it will do this. It will add all the lighting in, including the camera. Then we can look through our scene and render our objects, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, it won't do that straight away. What we are going to do is create the framework. We'll have this button right here that we can go ahead and click. And in fact, if nothing is selected, we'll have it say error. There is nothing selected, which is pretty awesome as well. And then it won't do anything. Then we'll need to add our code in order to give it some functionality. But actually getting this UI element set up first just gives us a bit more breathing space as we work around. Now let's go back to how the project was. Let's just revert our changes. And then the next thing we need to do is just have a quick look under the scripting workspace. If we go to templates, Python, and go down just a little, UI panel simple is actually a great example of where we want to start. Now this in front of us here doesn't look like it's going to do much. It's going to add a cube. It's going to be called Hello World. Okay, this is interesting. We've got some stuff here that we can refer to. And it's also done the if name equals main. It's done a register for us. We'll have to change these things out with our code. But we've got a good chunk of boilerplate code here that we can use. We will have to change some of it, quite a bit of it, in fact, in order to put it elsewhere. But let's just run through what this will actually do. It creates a panel in the object properties window. Well, the object properties is this orange box down here inside the properties window. So that's a good start. In fact, I'm just going to make this area a little larger. There we go. So under here, it's going to make something in here. Here we go. Hello world. And then we've got an add cube, name rimlight. So we can actually have a look at the code that we have here and see how it applies inside Blender. Here we have hello world panel. Hello world panel. That's the top bit here. If we were to give it a couple of L's on the end and rerun this, we can see it's actually updating the panel over here. Then we have the ID name, the space type. It's the properties window. It is a window, so it goes in here, and its context is object. I reckon if we change this to data, this is just a guess, by the way. I haven't tested this, but I reckon if we run this in data, it's going to exist in the data properties somewhere. Here we go at the top here. So we can place something already that we've kind of just pulled out from the templates. We can now change where it goes. Now, this is incorrect for having it over in the 3D view. So there's a thing here where this is probably going to be 3D view or something along those lines. And context might be panel or window, or I don't know what that is called at the moment from the top of my head, but we'll get there eventually. So without any further ado, let's take our UI simple panel as our starting point and start fleshing it out so we can have on this particular screen, we press N, we go to lighting, and we can add our camera and lighting. Okay, so we've got our simple UI panel in front of us. Let's rename this straight away, lighting panel.py, and then just save the file. Okay, so we're ready to start here. We've got a series of code here that we can adapt and use. Sometimes it's easier to type things out fresh, but at least we've got a framework here where we can add and remove things. Now, when it comes to the class definition at the top, we need to make sure that some of these things have changed so that it represents what's going on. The first one, of course, is the name. Now, this is going to exist over in the 3D view. It's going to be a panel type. So with our cursor over in the script editor, let's do view 3D, just letting us know where it is. What is it? It's going to be a panel type. So this capital PT stands for panel type. And later on, we will have OT for operator type. That's where our actual code that does something will be. And then we also have menu type, header type, and UI list as well that we could use. We're not going to use it in our add-on, but that is set nomenclature that is used. And then we can go underscore lighting underscore setup like so. bpy.types.panel is absolutely fine. Next down, this is a description of what this class does. Now it's going to create a panel in the 3D view. Now, the sidebar that we open up here is called the sidebar. Some people refer to it as the N panel. I believe it is internally called the sidebar, so we can do that. So it creates a lighting panel in the 3D view sidebar, not window, so we can get rid of that. What are we going to call this? Well, as you've probably guessed, I'm going to call this lighting setup. Now, we could just call this 3-point lighting setup because of what we're doing at the moment. However, I would like to expand this over time and include different types of lighting setup. So I'm just going to leave it as lighting setup. Down here, the BL ID name. This has to match what we've got at the top here. Otherwise, it won't work. But it does need to be in quotation marks. So let's add that in there. View underscore PT lighting setup. Where is this? Well, it's not in the properties window. It's not down here. It's going to be in the view 3D. So VIEW underscore 3D. Region type. Well, it's no longer a window. It's not taking up the whole window. It's actually part of the UI. And then this context is wrong. It's no longer going to be context. This is going to be category. And then we're going to have it called lighting like so. That is this top part now complete, unless I've made a typo, which is entirely possible. Let's go down to where it's drawn. So this is how it's laid out over on the side. We need to keep the top line, the layout equals self.layout. That refers to this instance of the panel that's created. And then object equals context.object. We're not going to have that, but we are going to keep context.object because we're going to use that later on to basically detect what is selected. Context.object literally means what is selected. If nothing is selected, then we can throw an error. The row equals layout row can go. We do need a label, but we're not going to use row anymore. We're going to use layout, and then we can delete all of this and then have the layout operator as well. So we need to add a bit more detail to these because they don't make any sense at the moment. And finally, down at the bottom here, so this lot is all together like so. And then underneath, we can have the if context.object. If it's selected, we can say something else. This is if nothing is selected, we can say, hey, there's nothing selected. We don't have the code for that just yet. Let's go back to the top and just fill out what we need next, because we've got some of the formatting that we're going to use. What this will say is not hello world, but 3-point lighting. So let's just make sure that's in there. Obviously, we can add other things later on in the future. Now, the icon itself, I'm just going to use the light icon. Now, the operator here, this will come a bit clearer later, but we're going to pop in lighting.scene_setup like so. This is then going to have some more text associated with it. So what we're going to see, well, the text, we're going to assign it a value, a string of add lighting and camera like so. And then finally, let's also have an icon. And this icon is going to be ever so slightly different. We're going to use the outliner light this time, just to give you a feel of different things that we can have a look at. So outliner_OB_light. And that should use this icon that we have here rather than the icon that we have down here. Finally, let's have this if context.object. So if it is selected, we're just going to display its name. So we can go layout, because that's what we're referring to here, the layout dot label. So what is the label going to say? And then we're going to do text and assign it a value. Now, this value is going to be an F string. That means that we can inject a particular thing, in this case, the context object, the thing that's selected, its name. So we can say target, and then in curly braces, we can go context.object.name, like so. And then, just like before, we can have an icon. And what we can assign this to is probably just the object data properties icon. So that's this one here, the square with some corners around it. So object_data. And then what do we do if it's not selected? Well, what we're going to have is layout.label, just like before, open parentheses, text, and we're going to assign it a value of nothing is selected. So no object selected. And then as an icon, because it's an error, I think the best one for this will be the error icon, like so. So if there's nothing selected, it will throw an error. It will say nothing is selected, and it will show the error icon. Okay, so we've done a lot of typing here. Finally, down at the register and unregister, this needs to be the same as the class name above. So if we copy that and paste that in down here, and we'll need to do the same for our operator in a bit when we create that. So all being well, if I go ahead and press play, when we open up the properties panel, I'll just open it up full screen. Yes, we've got a lighting thing here. And if I click here, our target is Suzanne. Then we've got a fill light. This is really good. This is exactly what I want to see. And if no object is selected, well, obviously at the moment, Suzanne is still the active selected object. However, a quick way of just checking that our code does work. There we go. Deleting everything so nothing can be selected. Not just the last object that was selected there. No objects are selected. And then if we were to add in Suzanne, she is selected. Clicking away doesn't necessarily deselect that at the moment, which is absolutely fine. But now we know our code works like so. And we've got these icons here as well. Excellent. So we've got the framework now set up. Okay, so let's undo that real quick so we get our scene back to previous. Now you will notice over here that we don't have that button yet. So let's do that. It's the final bit of placeholder that we need. We need a new class, And remember, when we've done that, we'll have to register it and add it to the unregister as well. So let's have our class. What are we going to call it? Well, this is going to be the lighting, and then we're going to use OT because it's an operator type. And we're going to call this scene setup. So scene setup, like so. Now we need to pass something into this. We need to pass in bpy.types, and you'll never guess what. If you said operator, well done. You're on the right track. Now, operator actually needs a capital O, like so. Colon on the end, and we need 3 opening quotations and 3 closed ones. And what does this do? Well, this adds a 3-point lighting setup and camera targeting the active object. Let's make sure we've got 2 spaces in between our classes. Now we need our BL name. Now this is where we're going to type in our lighting.scene.setup. In fact, we can copy and paste that in a moment. So we're going to assign that the value lighting scene setup, and that will link the 2. Okay, we need a label. And I could have done that first, couldn't I? So let's do BL label. So it's the same order as before. And let's assign it the value of add 3-point lighting. And then finally, we need to register this operator. So BL options, and we need our curly braces here. And both of these are going to be in quotation marks. We will have register, and then in quotation marks as well, we are going to have undo. And the final part of this class is going to be a definition. So we're going to create a function called execute. Now, this is where we will end up just dumping the majority of our code. This is what is being run when you push that button. So def execute, open our parentheses, and we need 2 things in here. You're always going to need a self, and then we will need the context. Make sure we've got a semicolon on the end, and then we need to do self.report, open curly braces, in quotation marks, we're going to put in info, and then after the curly braces, we're going to put in it works. And what this will do is when we push the button, we should, in the info window on the lower right, get it works coming out. That's the plan. And then all good functions return something at the end. So let's go ahead, return. And what are we going to return? We are going to return inside curly braces, finished, like so. Now, again, providing I've not made a typo, if I click run, we can see that it's run the script, but we don't see it yet over on our side panel yet. Let me just run through and make sure I've got everything included. Ah, yes. I said at the very beginning, we're going to have to register, and I almost forgot. So let's go ahead, copy that, and copy the one underneath. And then we can simply paste in the lighting OT scene setup into this area here, and one underneath as well. So we've got it registering, and if we uninstalled it, we would unregister it at that point. There we go. We've got add lighting and camera. And you can see down here, every time we click that, it's saying it works. Perfect. So there we go. We've got the entire framework now set up and ready to start populating. Now, this is quite a bit of code that we've typed so far and quite a bit of boilerplate. So if you wanted to, at this point in time, just capture this code as a starting point for the next time that you're making something like this, you won't have to repeat yourself over and over again. Obviously, you can get much more complex setups, not just a button, but that would be out of scope of what I'm trying to do today. Fantastic. The next thing we need to do is start expanding this function, the execute function, to contain all the code. And I'm not just going to cut and paste. We're going to refactor our code a little as I'm putting it in, just to make it neater and be better practice as we go. Now, after proofreading this code, I've realized there are a couple of mistakes. One is a typo at the very top here, adds a 3-point lighting. So I forgot the T there. But more importantly, BL option, it should be BL options. Otherwise, this isn't happening. And that means it's not going to work as I want it to. So let's go ahead and save and then continue. We're going to start by making the execute function a little safer before we get going. We need to define what actually happens if an object isn't selected. So right now, what we have in our code is we have this area here that just displays down at the bottom here. If we go ahead and run our code, we end up with, as we push the button, it works, it works. And that's what we want to see. We want to see it that it works, but it currently doesn't do anything. So let's do 2 things. First of all, we're going to make sure that it has a check. Is an object actually selected? And later on, we will develop that a little bit further and make sure that we're also checking the type of thing that's selected, because adding lights to a light would be nonsensical. And then after we've done that check that we do actually have an object selected, we can go ahead and run our code. So first of all, what we're going to do is assign ourselves. So let's make a variable first. Let's call it target and assign it what is currently selected. And the way that we do that is context.object. So if something is selected, we can check against this target variable. Okay, now that we have a target variable, we can say if target is none. So if nothing is selected, do the following. And we can borrow the code from underneath. So let's go ahead, copy that and paste it in. Now at the moment, if we run our script and then we go over and click the add lighting button, we can see here it works, it works, it works. And that little info icon is what we're doing here. So if we change this now to a warning, that means if something isn't selected, we're going to get a warning icon. So let's make sure nothing is selected, run our code so we've got the new script there and hit that. It will still say it works for the moment because it still sees a target of Suzanne, even though she's not selected. If we go and clear our entire scene down really quickly, there we go. We have no object selected, and we'll sort out something dynamic-wise later on. But now if I hit add lighting and camera, we get the it works, and then we do have this other it works coming through as well. And that's because we're not returning yet. And we also need to change what this says. So let's go ahead and change this to no active object selected. Then when we go ahead, run our code and press add camera and lighting, we get no active object selected. But because we're not returning from this, we are then running the rest of our code. So we do need to return from it. So let's return, make sure the indentation level is right there. But we're not going to return and say finished at all. We're going to say cancelled. Nothing has happened. We have not done anything further. So let's run that again. Add lighting and camera, no active object selected, and it's cancelled. That's what we want to be able to do. And let's go ahead and add something into our scene. Let's add a cube really quick and click add lighting and camera, and we just get the it works. So we know it's now bypassing this if target is none. There is a target, and we'll sort that out with a type later as well to double check, hey, there is something that is selected, but what type is it? Is it something we can actually light? But that's for later on, not now. Okay, so the next check that we can do is if it's of a valid type. Now, we could have a list of objects that we iterate through and make sure that it's not part of that list. I'm going to keep this simple just for now, and then we'll make it a bit more complex in a moment. So now we need to do if the target dot type, we're specifically talking about the type of the thing that's selected, is not equal to, let's just say mesh for the moment, and then we can make this a bit more complex. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to self.report. It'll be a warning again. So I'm just going to grab this code and reuse it down here. And this time we will have, well, it can be just not a mesh for the moment. And then we will return again with cancelled. We'll save that code, run it, and not a mesh. Oh, I've forgotten the colon at the end. Okay, let's go ahead and run that. It runs absolutely fine. We go ahead and run it. No active object selected. We go ahead and add a cube, which is selected, and try and run it. It will say it works. Fantastic. Now, if this was a different type, like a surface, if we then go ahead and add, we see it says not a mesh. So we can see there that it's stepping through these parts. Is it an object? Is something selected? Yes. Is it the right type? Yes or no? If it's not, it cancels, not a mesh. If it is, it just continues on with the code. So the final thing I want to do to this little area that I have in front of me is I don't want if target type is not a mesh. I'm going to have a list that we can go through. Now, before we do anything else, we should define that list. I'm going to call it valid underscore types. It's a variable that's going to store a list of items. Now, I keep saying list. This can be a list, which is square brackets. However, we're actually going to use a set, which is curly braces. The reason for that is it's unordered, no duplicates, and it's really fast lookup. So it's actually a bit more performant than a list. Think of it like this. A list is like reading through a guest list from the top to the bottom, checking each name. A set is more like shouting a name into a room and getting an instant yes or no. Now, with only these 6 items, it's going to make no practical difference which one you use. The reason to pick a set here is just that it says to everybody reading the code, I only care whether something is in this group or not. A list might suggest that the order matters or that there might be duplicates, neither of which are going to be true in this case. So let's dive back to the code. So our valid types are going to be a mesh, comma, and then a curve. You'll notice most of these. I just used one a moment ago, a surface, comma, and then font. So a text, comma, what else? Meta, as in a meta ball, things like that. And then finally, a G pencil. All of these can have light cast upon them. And there we go. So now we can do something else when it comes to the if target type. We can check whether or not it's inside this set. So if the target type not in valid types. If that's the case, then we can self-report it's not a mesh. We could actually jazz this up a little. We could make it an F string and we could say cannot light a, and then we could add in a target dot type. So that should say something like cannot light a light or something along those lines. Let's test it. Let's go ahead, run this code. It says it's working at the moment. That's because we still got this circle in here. Now, if we go ahead and add something that we know we can't light, like another light, and then we go ahead and try and run it, cannot light a light. Perfect. However, if we go ahead and add in a plane, yeah, perfect. It's a mesh type. Everything is working. Fantastic. So that just goes through and checks that we can actually take action on the scene in front of us. Excellent. And then just here is where we're going to add our code to make sure that everything is working. Now you'll notice here that we've also got the self.report it works. We'll have something else there like lighting scene added or something along those lines. But for here, what we could do is we could go ahead and grab all of our code from here. In theory, this will just work. Not the imports at the top. Let's do the imports first. Let's copy those and then go back to the lighting panel and at the very top, paste those in. Go back to our old code and just copy and paste this in. Now, whilst this will work, it is not advised because the code isn't quite ready yet. When I paste this in, it also won't format correctly. We can see that it's actually pushed itself in too far. I think it's going to need 2. Here we go. The first line came in. So if I press tab twice, they should all be lined up. And in theory, if I run my code, nope, what have we got here? We're missing a closing parentheses on line 22. Have I accidentally deleted something? Line 22, return cancelled. Okay, I don't know what went on there. Let's just save that and run our code. It runs successfully. Click on the object, add lighting, and we can see here, let's just make that full screen for a moment. It's actually added in our lighting and camera setup automatically, and we can go in and have a look at that. In fact, if we would change that out now for Suzanne the monkey, we can see she's pretty well lit. Now, there is a bit of bad practice going on here. I warned you about it earlier. We've got this, a load of variables just declared at the very top. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. The code will still work. And then later on, having this repetition it's horrible. It served its purpose for testing, no good anymore. So let's go through and sort that out. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create ourselves a list. And within that list, we are going to put some dictionaries. The dictionaries will contain key value pairs. So first of all, we need something to call this. I'm just going to call it lights for the moment. And this can be expanded later on with a dictionary of lists of dictionaries. But that's kind of outside the scope of this and does make it a bit more complex to wrap your head around. Now, because it's a list, we're going to use square brackets. I'm just going to press enter a couple of times. We also need curly braces for our dictionary. Then inside here, we are going to have these 4 fields. We've got a name, a location, an energy, and a color. So inside our quotations, we're going to have a name. We're going to have a location. We're going to have an energy, and we're going to have a color. Fantastic. We need a colon on the end of all of these. Now, before we go ahead and just copy these up, we're going to want 3 of those. So at the very end, because it's a list, we're going to put a comma, and that's the first element of our list. So I can copy that, I can press return and paste it in again. and paste it in one more time. These are going to be our 3 lights. We have our key light, and I've just realized at this point in time, I have mixed up the way that we do this. We should ideally have quotation marks or the apostrophe, not a mixture of both. Bad me. I'm not going to go through and rectify that at the moment, but we're all fallible. That's all I'm going to say on that one. And not that I wasn't paying attention and changed what I was doing midway through the project. Right, anyway. So we copy and paste all these across. And you may be asking, fundamentally, aren't we just kind of repeating ourselves here? Is this really that different from just having them all as variables here? The short answer is, on the surface level, no. It is very, very similar. In terms of data storage, though, this is a much better structure to store something in. We can now do stuff with this, not just accessing them individually, but down here, we can go through our light setup, and instead of passing it all through like we did before, we can do something ever so slightly different. Okay, so we have our light set up here. This is where we're going to do the majority of our changes. First of all, we're going to get rid of all of that completely. We don't need to run that light setup 3 separate times and pump stuff in. What we're going to do now is something slightly different. I'm going to keep some of my code, but change it out as we go. This time, we're going to do a for loop. We're going to say for the light definition. Now, just to be clear, this is a new variable that we're creating right now that's going to hold the data. So as we go through the lights, we can do the following. We can go bpy.object.light add, and the type equals type. That's fine. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we're going to name it slightly differently this time round. This before was getting whatever was selected. Because we've just added the light, it is the selected object, and we just confirm it here and change the location, data, etc. However, this time round, we're just going to have the light be the selected object. We can go context.object in this context, and then we can go light.name. We can assign it the value that's within our light def. So light_def, and then just what the name is, right? So we can come in quotation marks, name, like so. And we do exactly the same for the location, the energy, and the color. The location becomes light def, and then in square brackets, location. So I'm going to paste that in and change this out to location. For energy, I'm going to paste that in and change this out for energy. I'm going to go to color, paste that in, and type in color. Now that is all fine and working. And then finally, it works. We don't want to say it works anymore. We could say 3-point lighting added successfully, or something along those lines. Now I'm going to save that. Hopefully everything's on there and sorted. I'm going to delete the example lights I dumped in before. Let's select that. I've run my code. I've missed something. Invalid syntax. What have I forgotten? Location, line 33. Forgotten the comma. And this is probably because of the way I set it up. I do apologize. If you caught it earlier and started screaming at me, you rightfully did that. All of these need a comma after them. And potentially the last one as well, as far as that goes. Let's go ahead and press play. It ran the script. Oh, simple things like that drive me bonkers. Well, I'm still always learning, and it does get a bit challenging when recording it at the same time. Okay, so now that we've run the code, it says it's run the script successfully. It should mean that if we select Suzanne the monkey, add lighting. Oh, we have one more bug. It's added the camera, and then line 63. Don't you just love it when it's lovely and raw and mistakes happen? So line 63, expected a string enum, not a type. So type here equals light_type, which we've defined further up. That's why that wasn't working. I forgot to put in the type afterwards. So this is good. Line 63, type equals light type. The script is running as expected. Let's remove the camera from the scene. Let's go big again. Click on Suzanne, add lighting. Yes! Brilliant. Oh, and I think we are all done. We've wrapped up everything there. We've made mistakes, and hopefully we've fixed all of the big bugs in there. Now, there's certainly lots you could do to expand this. These lights here, if you were to actually have multiple different setups that you wanted to do, you could pop them inside and have a dictionary. So in this case, oh, can I do a quick example? Do you want me to do a quick? I wish you could say yes or no. Let's just do a quick example. This could be placed inside a larger structure, but it starts to get a little bit unwieldy if you have too many of these. So we could have something like some presets here or something along those lines. And this would be a dictionary. And we could put the curly brace at the end somewhere down here. And then we would indent all of this by 1. And instead of it being called lights like that, it wouldn't be able to be a variable anymore. It needs to be a key value pair. And the key would be something like 3 point. And then we put a colon after it. And then everything in this list. And we'd need a comma at the end. Don't forget your commas. And then here you would have 2 point. And you would continue this. We'd come to the end. We'd put our colon in. And then we'd start another list like so further in, and you would get rid of one of those like so. And then it's just a 2 point light, set up the key and the fill. And then we would iterate through or just pick a preset. So we don't have to actually change any of the rest of our code. Further down, we could have our light def in lights. Well, lights doesn't exist anymore. So before we actually did the light setup, we could come in here and actually define it as lights and assign it presets in square brackets. And here, for instance, we could pick 2 point. I think that's how I spelt it. Yep. So inside here, if we go to the outliner, let's say, and delete everything, select Suzanne. Let's run our code. We've got a little problem. Oh, I've just mashed the keys. Let's get rid of that equals. Okay, that looks better. Press play, runs the script. Excellent. Now, because down here we've got the 2 point being selected as the preset, we can select our object and we can see it adds in over the fill and key. If we were to change this to 3 point, and this is something you could externalize as well into the add-on. Let's go ahead and run that, clear down those other things, add the lighting and camera. We can't do that. No active object selected. We know that works. Let's make sure it's active and selected. And there we go. We've now got 3 lights coming in. So, yeah. Let's finish this off by adding a preset button at the top there for us to click. Okay, so the final thing, I've added this on at the end. It's a little bit less scripted than anything else. First of all, we've got our presets. At the moment, they're buried within this function. They don't need to be. They shouldn't be. Ideally, they would be in something like presets.py, a different file altogether. However, we will do like we did before. We're just going to pull these out and pop them at the very top out of the way. They're just a set of data that just helps us control what's going on. I'm happy with having them at the top. As I say, later on we'd move them out to their own file so that we're keeping our code a bit cleaner again by keeping things like the presets away from the actual logic of what's going on. Then we're going through and we've got our operator, so our lighting setup here. I'm just going to go through everything and check against my notes as we go. So we've got everything here working as expected. Then we get to our execute function. What is going to happen? We've got is something selected? If no, then return. That's absolutely fine. Then we've got our valid types and we can lump those two together. I want a separation just here. Then we're checking if it's an object selected. That's also fine. Camera location. I'm not liking here after reviewing the code that this is all split up. This is all to do with the camera setup. So let's add the camera, then sort out where it needs to be. That's absolutely fine. And then we use those right underneath. I don't like these magic numbers. We could break that down even further and go camera equals context.object instead, and then just do camera.location. Is this camera always going to be the same? I think until we do something special with it, we should probably leave that as is. But if you did want to do this just for an example with the location, what we could do is cam equals context.object. We've done this before, whatever the current selected one is. And then here, this wouldn't be camera.location. We would literally be doing this part here. So context.object.location. So we would just do cam.location and then assign it this particular value. It's still hard coded. Is it a bit cleaner? Probably. And I want to make my stuff as best as I can, consistent as we go through. So this will be cam.rotation Euler, like so. And then we can get rid of those 2 lines of code. Not important. However, it does read a bit cleaner. And until we do something magical with the camera, like have different camera positions baked in, I think that's absolutely fine. We've got this light area type. I think that does need to be removed. That can go inside here quite easily. Light type is area. In fact, do we use light type anywhere else other than there? Okay, so again, cleaning up, making things simple. That is hard coded in there at that point in time. So we'd have to make a note here, hard coded type. And then if we ever needed to go back and change it, we've just got a little note there that that is a hard coded type. Object to light, is this a redundant thing now that we've removed everything else? I think it is. Object to light is used here. But actually, don't we? Yeah, at the top here, these two lines are essentially the same. So we can change object to light just here. We can get rid of it, but it is used. It is used down here, object to light, just there. So we can change that out for target. I will just check that everything is working at this stage because I've changed quite a bit of code. Yep, that seems to be working absolutely fine. So we're getting to the point now after we've tidied up the code. I think there's not much else to do here except the actual implementation over in the viewport itself. And we probably, yes, we will need to move out. Sorry, this bit here is hard coded as well. This is going to be needed to be dragged out somehow. And we can then reference it from up here rather than down here. I think that's going to be an enumeration so that we can go through the lists themselves. So line 72, hard-coded, needs to be selected, and we'll come back to that in a short while. And then down here, we also have hard-coded needs to be selected. So whatever we end up selecting, however we set that up, this will also need to be changed. This will be an F string with blah, blah, added successfully. I don't know what that will look like at the moment, but we will get back to that. Now let's go through the panel itself. This is absolutely fine. It's not going to be 3-point lighting anymore. It's just going to be lighting setup, something along those lines. And it's important to understand as you start changing things around, that's where you really start to get into the weeds with, oh, if I'd set that up differently beforehand, I'd have been able to have more efficient, or it would have been quicker to sort out. But the other thing to realize is you don't always know everything ahead of time. So being able to be adaptable and changing things as you go is really important. We're still going to have our lighting operator as we've done before, but in between there, so if we go back to this screen, sorry, I want my 3-point lighting drop down to be above because you want to select what type you want before you go ahead and click the button. So it's going to have to be before there. This is always going to read in order and therefore add things from top to bottom. So we're going to need another layout, but this time it's going to be a prop. And this will be context.scene, comma, and then it'll be lighting underscore preset because we want to be able to set a preset up there. So we've got the prop. And when playing around, I found something out myself as we're going through. At the moment, if you click, we can see the target is updating as we're going through. We could actually have our checking code that we put in further up, this warning about whether or not things are correct. We still need it there during that operation, but we can also check through those things, especially the type, these valid types just here. We can check through it as we're actually clicking on things. And so we can actually get the feedback. Not only can we not click on it, so when we click the button, the operator runs, but we can actually have it checking as we start clicking on things and it warning underneath that it's not the right type. And we just need an extra line or two of code down here. So if the context.object, and we've already got, if it's selected, right, that's that warning. However, we can also bring in what we had above. Let's go find it, the valid types. Now we're going to be using it in multiple places. So I would argue we could probably bring valid types up a level and have it all the way up here. And then what we can do is reference this further down. We've referenced it in here. And then further down, we can say right here. So if the context.object.type is in our particular list, so this one here, our valid types, we can just name it, and then we can borrow this else statement here. So we've got a bit of a nesting going on, but instead of having no object selected, what we can have here is object cannot be lit and show an error. Now we could even be a bit more specific about this and use an F string just like we did before. So whatever the object is, so we can go ahead and get its name instead. Let's move my cursor out the way. This will be curly braces, context dot object dot name cannot be lit. Now, if I've got my stuff right, I'm just going to go ahead and test that before I do anything else. Let's select a light, select it over in the hierarchy, run our code. Oh, we've got an error, lighting preset 1112. Oh, I've put a full stop in there instead of a comma. I do apologize. That should have been a comma. 118. Have I done another thing similar? Indents, indents, indents. Let's go ahead, run. Yep, absolutely fine. Fill light cannot be lit. Suzanne can. Camera cannot be lit. Rim light cannot be lit. Perfect. That's exactly the behavior I want. Gives you the feedback straight away. Now, we don't have the right thing there yet for our button. Let's go ahead and do that now. So under the register, we're going to have our preset. So let's give ourselves a little bit of space. And the reason why we're about to add something in here is it's all about when Blender is ready to accept it. bpy.types.scene, which is something we're about to use, is part of Blender's own internal data system. So when Blender loads the add-on for the first time, it runs the file from top to bottom, how Python usually works, just to read the class definitions and function definitions. At that point, it hasn't committed to actually activating your add-on yet. It's just parsing the data. Popping this in the register function, when Blender calls it, it actually enables your add-on. There's that moment where Blender is saying, right, go ahead and set yourself up. It's at that point where it's safe to attach custom properties, which is what we're about to do, to Blender's data types, whether it's a scene, an object, a material, etc. If you put it all at the top level of the file, it would run the moment the file is imported, which could be before Blender is even initialized, or it could even run if the user never enables the add-on. That is possible. You'd be modifying Blender's data types as a side effect of just importing the module, which is not something we want to do. And we will be adding something to the unregister side as well, because we need to delete the scene lighting preset so that it's removed cleanly when we uninstall the add-on. And this is not just for other people who may be using your add-on. It's also for yourself, because if you leave legacy stuff in your Blender configuration, you're eventually going to end up with a ton of pain as something won't be working properly and you won't know why, because you've activated it outside of the usual safety mechanisms that are there. So the register function, whilst we're talking about it, is basically everything my add-on needs to register it and work. And unregister is just tearing it all down. The scene property we're about to use is part of what our add-on needs, so it needs to belong to that kind of life cycle going round. Okay, let's go ahead and start adding in the little bit at the top down with our drop downs. So this is going to be a bpy.types.scene.lighting preset, so underscore preset, and then we're going to set it to bpy dot. Now props is lowercase, and then dot enum property has a capital on both E and the P in it. And then we can open up our parentheses and give ourselves a tiny bit of space to work. The name is what we're going to call it, what we're going to see it appear. So this will be presets. It's as simple as that. And when we click on that drop down, we'll have our items in a moment. So next, the description. So this is the same as our triple quotes that we were using before. And this can simply say something like choose a lighting preset. And then we need our items, what's going to be in this list. And again, this is actually going to be a list this time. So square brackets, give ourselves some space as normal. And what are we going to put in here? Well, we're going to have, if we scroll all the way up to the top, we've got 2 point. So we will need to reference this here. We'll also need to type in something of what it's called. And then finally, kind of a description as to what we want. And then we can also set a default if we want to as well. So back down here, our items. This is going to be what we have above. So 2 point, comma, then we'll have 2 point. Again, that's just what it will be referenced, what it will be called in that drop down. And then finally, let's give it key and fill lights, something along those lines. Then I'm going to copy that make sure I put a comma on the end this time. Otherwise it won't work. And then add a comma to the end there as well. So we've got our name. Oh, I'm missing lots of commas today. Commas seem to be my nemesis. So as we go through this, we need to separate all of these parameters with commas. Maybe I will internalize that. Okay, so we've got our 2 point. This is going to become 3 point. 3 point. And then we've got key. This comma is not like the other commas, but I will include it. And rim lights, something along those lines. That looks pretty good to me. So I did mention that we can have a default. So let's put a comma at the end of this and then have a default and assign it. Let's pick 3 point as the default option. So if nothing is selected, 3 point will be the one that is picked. Now, I did say a moment ago that the unregister is also going to be important. So at the very end of this, we need to do some cleaning up, and we need to clean up bpy.types.scene. In fact, it's just this here. This is what we need to clean up. So let's just copy and paste it in directly like so. So that will clean it up and remove it from the system once we've removed it. Let's press play. Enum property. Okay. I should probably go for some tests. ENUM. Let's run our code again. Okay, fantastic. It's run the script. We can see 3 point is selected, and we've got 2 point and 3 point as drop downs. Fantastic. Let's remove all the extra things from the scene. Let's go ahead, open everything up. Fantastic. I'm going to put it on rendered view so we can just see the effect once these things are added in. That says 2 point, and it has added 3 lights in. Okay, let's just see if the 3 points actually sets up as well. So I've done something wrong there, obviously. 3, yep. 2, select Suzanne, select 2. No, it's definitely putting in 3. So let's just see what I've done wrong just there. Ah, dear. They both say 3 point, don't they? And that is because I've remembered it's hard-coded. It's not the self-report here. That's just what's being passed back to us. But our presets here are always 3 point lightings. So what do we need to change that to? It's going to be context.scene.lighting_preset. Now, before we do anything else, I'm going to copy that. And then down here, this is going to become an F string. And we're going to have it say the context.scene lighting. So squiggly braces, the context.scene.lighting has been successfully added. Run our code. Looks good. Let's make this full screen again so we can see what's going on. Clear down everything else. If we select 2 point, add, it's got our 2. Fantastic. Back to previous, we should see down here 2 point lighting added successfully. And if I just select Suzanne again with nothing else in our scene for clarity, add 3 point light added successfully, and 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. And whilst we're at the end, I hope you've really enjoyed that. If you got to the end, you've obviously been enjoying it. And I really appreciate you joining me on this journey of creating an add-on. And especially at the end where you get to see a bit more of the raw me, struggling a little and forgetting simple things like putting in a comma. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thank you for watching. Hope that helps. If you want to support the channel, then of course I've got the Blender Python course. I'm going to include a special coupon code for anybody who's got this far. I'll pop it on the screen now. No, I'll pop it in the description as well, so you can just click ahead and go to it. Okay, that's it for this one. If you've got any questions, do reach out, sound off in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next one.